In the winter of 1832, a trapper named Antoine Clement stumbled into a Crow Indian camp on the banks of the Yellowstone River, more dead than alive. His fingers were black with frostbite, his buckskin leggings frozen stiff as planks, and his Hawken rifle was lashed to his back with rawhide because his hands could no longer grip it. He had walked for 11 days through waist-deep snow, eating nothing but strips of parfleche and the inner bark of cottonwood trees. When the Crow women pulled him into a buffalo hide lodge and wrapped him in warm robes beside the fire, he wept, not from pain, not from relief, but because he could finally stop walking. Antoine Clement survived that winter, though he lost 3 fingers and 2 toes to the surgeon's knife at the summer rendezvous. His story was not unusual. In the Rocky Mountains during the 1820s and 1830s, winter was not merely a season. It was a test of everything a man had learned, everything he owned, and everything he was willing to endure. 1 in 4 men who entered the mountains never came back out. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and your local time in the comments because I always love seeing where you are listening from. Someone in Dublin at 2 in the morning, someone in Manila at noon, someone in a cabin in Montana at 11 o'clock at night. You are all here, and that is something. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let us ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing in the dusty streets of St. Louis, Missouri, in the spring of 1828. The air smells of river mud and wood smoke, of horse manure and fresh baked bread from the French bakeries along the waterfront. The Mississippi rolls past, wide and brown and powerful, carrying flatboats and keelboats and the occasional steamboat belching black smoke into a pale blue sky. You have come here from somewhere back east, maybe Pennsylvania, maybe Virginia, maybe Kentucky, drawn by a newspaper advertisement you saw tacked to the wall of a tavern. The advertisement, placed by a man named William Henry Ashley, called for enterprising young men to ascend the Missouri River and engage in the fur trade. You are 22 years old, strong as a draft horse, and utterly ignorant of what lies ahead. The fur trade is booming. Beaver pelts, called hairy banknotes by the men who trap them, fetch $3 to $6 apiece in St. Louis, and a skilled trapper can take 100 or more in a single season. The pelts are shipped east, then across the Atlantic to London and Paris, where hatters press them into the tall, beaver felt top hats that every fashionable gentleman must own. You have heard stories of men who went into the mountains with nothing and came back rich. What the stories do not mention, or mention only in passing, the way you might mention a light rain, is that the mountains kill men. With the casual efficiency of a butcher dressing a hog, you sign your name on the company roster at a stone building on the waterfront. The clerk, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, barely looks up. He records your name, your age, and the pittance you will be paid, about $400 a year, roughly what a decent carpenter earns back east, except the carpenter does not risk being scalped, mauled by grizzlies, drowned in spring floods, or frozen to death in 40-below-zero winters. You are issued a basic outfit, a flintlock rifle, a powder horn, a bullet mold, a hunting knife, a hatchet, a tin cup, a blanket, and 6 steel beaver traps that weigh about 5 pounds each. The total weight of your kit, not counting the horse you will ride and the mule that will carry your packs, is roughly 60 pounds. You join a brigade of about 40 men gathered at the riverfront. Some are experienced trappers, lean and weathered, with scars on their hands and a wary look in their eyes. They wear buckskin from head to toe, fringed hunting shirts, leggings, moccasins, and carry their rifles with the easy familiarity of men who sleep with their weapons. These are the veterans, the men who have already survived 1 or more winters in the Rockies. They call themselves mountain men, and they use the term with a quiet pride that borders on arrogance. You are a greenhorn, a pork eater, a man who has never tasted buffalo hump or slept in a snowdrift. The veterans regard you with a mixture of amusement and pity. They know that by this time next year, a fair number of the greenhorns will be dead. Your brigade leader is a wiry Virginian named Thomas Fitzpatrick, whom everyone calls Broken Hand on account of an old injury that left his left hand permanently curled. Fitzpatrick is 30 years old and has been in the mountains since 1823. He has fought Blackfoot and Arikara warriors, survived a grizzly attack, been lost alone in the wilderness for weeks, and once walked 200 miles on foot after his horse was stolen. He speaks with a soft drawl that makes everything sound reasonable, even when he is describing something terrifying. "Boys," he says, looking over the assembled company with eyes the color of creek water, "we are heading into country that will try to kill you every single day. The rivers will try to drown you, the Indians may try to scalp you, the bears will try to eat you, and come winter, the cold will try to freeze the blood in your veins. Your job is to not let any of those things happen." He pauses, then adds with the ghost of a smile, "Also, trap beaver." The journey upriver takes weeks. You travel by keelboat at first, poling and cordelling against the relentless current of the Missouri, hauling the heavy boat upstream with ropes while mosquitoes swarm around your head in clouds so thick you can taste them. The Missouri is a treacherous river, full of snags and sandbars and sudden collapsing banks that can swallow a boat whole. Every bend brings a new hazard: submerged logs that can punch through a hull, whirlpools that spin the boat sideways, and stretches of current so powerful that 40 men pulling on the cordel can barely make headway. You cover perhaps 15 miles on a good day, 5 on a bad one. The food is salt pork and hardtack and river water that tastes of mud. At Council Bluffs, the last outpost of anything resembling civilization, the brigade trades its keelboat for horses and pack mules. From here on, you ride. The Great Plains stretch before you like an ocean of grass, rolling and endless, broken only by the occasional line of cottonwoods that marks a stream. The sky is so vast it makes you dizzy. Back east, the sky was something you glimpsed between buildings and trees. Here, it fills your entire field of vision, horizon to horizon, a dome of blue so deep it looks like it might swallow the earth. At night, the stars are so bright and numerous that they cast faint shadows on the ground. You have never seen so many stars. You lie in your blanket, staring up at the Milky Way, and feel very small and very far from home. The veterans teach you as you ride. Old Bill Williams, a gaunt, red-haired Missourian who talks to himself and rides a mule he calls Old Reliable, shows you how to read sign, how to tell the age of a track by the sharpness of its edges, how to spot the faint trail left by an Indian war party, how to distinguish elk tracks from deer tracks from the massive saucer-sized prints of a bull buffalo. Jacques Laramie, a French-Canadian trapper with a magnificent black mustache and a laugh like a thunderclap, teaches you how to set a beaver trap properly, wade into the icy stream, drive a stake into the mud, attach the trap by its chain, and smear a willow twig with castoreum, a musky, pungent secretion from the beaver's own glands, to lure the animal. The beaver, he is smart, Jacques tells you in his thick accent, twisting the end of his mustache, but he cannot resist the smell of his own cousin's perfume. This is his weakness, and this is how we catch him. You learn to make fire with flint and steel, striking sparks into a nest of charred cotton or dried fungus. You learn to identify edible plants, the starchy roots of the camas lily, the tart berries of the serviceberry bush, the tender shoots of wild onion. You learn to butcher a buffalo, cutting through the thick hide with short, precise strokes, separating the hump ribs and tenderloin, the choicest cuts, from the rest of the carcass. You learn that buffalo tongue, roasted over an open fire, is one of the finest delicacies you have ever tasted, rich and tender and faintly sweet. You also learn, with considerable reluctance, that when food is scarce, meat is meat. This means you will eat beaver, muskrat, rattlesnake, prairie dog, and in truly desperate times, your own moccasins boiled into a thin, leathery broth that provides just enough nourishment to keep you moving. The brigade crosses the plains through the summer, following the Platte River westward into what is now Nebraska and Wyoming. The landscape changes gradually. The flat grasslands give way to rolling hills, then to broken, eroded badlands, sculpted by wind and water into fantastic shapes. Towers and spires and bridges of tan and ochre stone that look like the ruins of some ancient, impossible city. You begin to see the mountains in the distance, jagged line of blue-white peaks rising above the horizon like the teeth of some enormous sleeping beast. The Rockies, your destination, your home for the next several years if you survive. The first time you see the mountains up close, you are struck by their sheer, impossible scale. Nothing in your experience has prepared you for this. The tallest building you have ever seen is perhaps 4 stories high. These peaks rise 10, 12, 14,000 feet above the valley floors, their summits capped with snow that never melts, their flanks covered with forests of pine and spruce so dark, they look almost black from a distance. The air is thinner here, and you notice it in the way your heart pounds when you climb a steep trail, in the way a simple task like chopping wood leaves you breathless. Sound carries differently too. A rifle shot echoes and re-echoes off the canyon walls, bouncing back and forth until it sounds like a small war. Your brigade arrives at the fall trapping grounds in late September, setting up camp in a broad valley along a beaver-rich stream. The fall trapping season is crucial. Beaver pelts are at their thickest and most valuable in autumn and early spring, when the animals have grown their winter coats. You spend your days wading in ice-cold streams, setting and checking traps, skinning beaver, and stretching the pelts on willow hoops to dry. The work is brutal. Your hands are constantly wet, constantly cold, and the steel traps are heavy and awkward to carry. Your back aches from bending over in the water, and your moccasins, soaked through within minutes, freeze solid overnight. Each morning you have to thaw them by the fire before you can put them on, and they never really dry. Your feet are always cold, always damp, always on the verge of developing the painful, swollen condition the trappers call cold foot, what a doctor would recognize as the early stages of frostbite. But the trapping is good, and the beaver are plentiful, and each pelt you stretch on, its willow hoop represents money in your pocket and a step toward the small fortune you came west to earn. By mid-November, you have accumulated a tidy pile of pelts, carefully bundled and cached in a dry cave above the stream. And then, one morning, you wake to find the world transformed. It snowed overnight, not a light dusting, but a genuine mountain snowfall, 2 feet deep, covering everything in a thick white blanket that muffles all sound, and turns the familiar landscape into something alien and disorienting. The temperature has dropped to well below zero. The stream, where you set your traps, is frozen solid, a sheet of gray ice that creaks and groans in the cold. The trapping season is over. Winter has arrived, and for the next 5 months, your single overriding goal will be survival. The first order of business is finding a suitable place to winter. You cannot stay here, in this exposed valley at 8,000 feet, where the wind howls down from the peaks with nothing to stop it, and the snow will eventually pile up 10 or 15 feet deep. You need to get lower, find a sheltered valley with plenty of timber for firewood, grass for the horses, and game to hunt. Fitzpatrick makes the decision quickly. You are heading for a place the trappers call Brown's Hole, a deep, narrow valley carved by the Green River through the mountains of what is now northwestern Colorado, near the borders of Utah and Wyoming. Brown's Hole is famous among the mountain men as a wintering ground. The valley sits at about 5,500 feet, nearly 3,000 feet lower than the surrounding mountains, creating a natural pocket that is somewhat protected from the worst of the high-altitude storms. The Green River flows through it, providing water even in the deepest cold, and the valley walls block the savage winds that roar across the open plains. The ride to Brown's Hole takes 9 days, 9 days of pushing through snow that sometimes reaches your horse's belly, of crossing frozen streams where the ice is just thick enough to bear the weight of a horse if you lead it carefully, of climbing over ridges where the wind cuts through your buckskin like a knife through warm butter. The temperature drops steadily as November wears on, -10, -20, -25. Your breath freezes in your beard, forming tiny icicles that clink together when you turn your head. Your eyelashes frost over, and you have to blink constantly to keep them from freezing shut. The metal parts of your rifle are so cold that touching them with bare skin will rip the flesh right off your fingers, so you keep the gun wrapped in a piece of blanket and handle it only with gloved hands. You lose 2 horses on the 3rd day. They simply stop, standing motionless in the snow with their heads hanging, and nothing, no amount of pulling, pushing, or cursing can make them move again. Their legs have given out, their lungs are burning from the thin, frigid air, and they have nothing left. You strip the saddles and packs from them, and redistribute the load among the remaining animals. One of the veterans, a grizzled Kentuckian named Ezra, looks at the dying horses with an expression of weary resignation. "Reckon we will be eating horse meat before Christmas," he says, and nobody argues. When you finally drop down into Brown's Hole, the relief is almost physical. The valley is perhaps 35 miles long and a few miles wide, walled in by sandstone cliffs that glow red and orange in the winter sun. The Green River, Still flowing despite the cold, winds through cottonwood groves and meadows of dried brown grass. There is firewood everywhere. Dead cottonwood, dry juniper, thick stands of pine on the lower slopes. And there are other people here already. A band of Ute Indians is camped at the lower end of the valley, their cone-shaped teepees arranged in neat rows along the riverbank, thin columns of smoke rising from the smoke holes into the still, cold air. At the upper end of the valley, you can see the crude log shelters of another trapping brigade, half-faced camps and lean-tos built against the cliff walls. With heavy buffalo hide coverings stretched over pole frames, your brigade chooses a spot midway along the valley in a dense grove of cottonwoods that provides shelter from the wind and easy access to water. The first task is building winter quarters. You are not building anything permanent. No log cabins, no houses with proper chimneys and plank floors. Mountain men do not build permanent structures. They build shelters that are quick to erect, reasonably warm, and easy to abandon if hostile Indians or dwindling game force them to move. The most common winter shelter is the half-faced camp, a three-sided structure made of poles, brush, and buffalo hides, open on one side to face a large fire. You and two other men spend an entire day constructing yours, cutting poles from young cottonwood trees, lashing them together with rawhide, weaving pine boughs through the frame for insulation, and draping two heavy buffalo robes over the top and sides. The open face is oriented to the southeast, away from the prevailing northwest wind, and your fire pit is dug about 4 feet in front of the opening, close enough to radiate warmth into the shelter, but far enough to keep the sparks from catching the buffalo robes on fire. Inside the shelter, the ground is covered with a thick layer of pine boughs that serve as both insulation and mattress. Over the pine boughs go your blankets and buffalo robes, the robes with the fur side up, forming a warm, slightly scratchy bed that is surprisingly comfortable once you get used to it. A single buffalo robe, properly prepared, is remarkably warm. The thick woolly hair traps body heat like a down comforter, and the heavy hide underneath blocks the wind. 2 robes, one below you and one on top, will keep you alive in temperatures that would kill an unprotected man in less than an hour. The mountain men prize their buffalo robes above almost everything else they own, and a good robe, thick, supple, taken from a cow buffalo killed in late autumn when the fur is at its densest, is worth more than a fine rifle. The half-faced camp is crude, drafty, and far from luxurious, but it works, with a good fire burning in front. And buffalo robes behind you, the temperature inside the shelter can be 30 or 40 degrees warmer than the air outside. On a night when the temperature drops to -30, that means your shelter might be a relatively balmy 0, cold by any civilized standard, but warm enough to sleep, warm enough to survive. The veterans have a saying, if you can feel your toes, you are doing fine. This is not entirely a joke. In the mountains, in winter, the ability to feel your extremities is a genuine luxury. Many trappers have lost fingers, toes, and portions of their ears and noses to frostbite, and the scars and missing digits are displayed with a peculiar pride, like medals earned in some invisible war. The routine of winter camp settles over you like a heavy blanket. Each day follows a predictable rhythm, regulated not by clocks, you do not own one, but by the arc of the sun, the state of the fire, and the gnawing demands of your stomach. You wake before dawn, not because you want to, but because the fire has burned. Low and the cold has crept into your shelter like a living thing, pressing against your buffalo robes, finding every gap in your clothing, settling into your bones with a deep, persistent ache. You lie still for a moment, reluctant to leave the relative warmth of your bed, watching your breath rise in pale clouds and listening to the silence. Winter silence in the mountains is unlike anything you have experienced before. There are no birds singing, no insects buzzing, no rustling of leaves. There is only the faint creak of trees contracting in the cold, the occasional distant crack of a branch breaking under the weight of snow, and the soft, steady murmur of the green river flowing beneath its shelf of ice. You roll out of your robes, pull on your moccasins, which you kept inside your bedding overnight to prevent them from freezing, and build up the fire. Firewood is the currency of winter survival. You need it constantly, in enormous quantities, and gathering it is the single most time-consuming task of your daily routine. A good fire burns through a pile of wood the size of a small horse in a single night, and by morning you need more. Fortunately, the cottonwood groves around your camp provide an ample supply of dead wood, and the dry juniper that grows on the valley slopes burns hot and slow, producing excellent coals. You and your companions take turns on wood-gathering duty, heading out with hatchets and rawhide ropes to chop fallen trees into manageable lengths and drag them back to camp. It is hard, sweaty work, even in the bitter cold, and you learn quickly to pace yourself. Working up a heavy sweat in sub-zero temperatures is dangerous. The moisture soaks through your clothing, and when you stop moving, the sweat freezes against your skin, chilling you far more effectively than the cold air alone ever could. The veterans call this sweating yourself to death, and they are not joking. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is whatever meat you have on hand, roasted on a stick over the fire or thrown directly onto the coals. If hunting has been good, it might be elk or deer, rich, gamey, sustaining. If hunting has been poor, it might be a thin strip of dried buffalo meat, hard as leather and about as flavorful, that you chew and chew and chew until your jaw aches and the fibers finally break down enough to swallow. There is no bread, no flour, no salt, no sugar, no coffee, no vegetables, no fruit. Your diet is meat, meat, and more meat, supplemented occasionally by whatever roots or dried berries you manage to gather in the fall. The mountain men call this the meat diet, and it has certain well-known effects on the body. Your energy levels fluctuate wildly. You can go all day on a single large meal of fresh meat, or you can be ravenous within hours if the meat is lean and lacking in fat. Fat is everything. Without fat, your body cannot process the protein efficiently, and you develop a condition the trappers call rabbit starvation, a gnawing, desperate hunger that no amount of lean meat can satisfy. The experienced trappers know this, and they always seek out the fattiest cuts, the hump ribs of the buffalo, the marrow from the leg bones, the thick layer of tallow beneath the hide of a well-fed deer. Fat keeps you alive. Fat keeps you warm. Fat is the difference between thriving and slowly starving to death in a land of apparent plenty. After breakfast, the day stretches before you like a long, cold road with no particular destination. There is work to do. There is always work to do. But the frenetic pace of the trapping season has given way to the slower, more deliberate rhythms of winter survival. You repair your equipment, patching your moccasins with scraps of hide, replacing a broken thong on your powder horn, sharpening your knife on a flat river stone. You care for the horses and mules, leading them to whatever patches of dried grass you can find beneath the snow or cutting cottonwood branches for them to eat. Cottonwood bark is one of the few foods that will keep a horse alive through a mountain winter, and the animals strip it from the branches with desperate enthusiasm, their teeth scraping the wood white. But cottonwood bark is not particularly nutritious, and the horses grow thinner and weaker as the weeks pass. Their ribs showing through their shaggy winter coats, their heads hanging low as they stand motionless in the cold. The afternoons are for hunting. Even in winter camp, you must hunt. The dried meat and pemmican you cached in the fall will not last 5 months, and fresh meat is essential for maintaining your strength. Hunting in deep snow is exhausting, punishing work. You strap on snowshoes, crude affairs made from bent willow and rawhide, shaped like elongated teardrops, and set out into the white, silent world, your rifle cradled in the crook of your arm, your eyes scanning the tree line for movement. Elk are your primary quarry. They come down from the high country in winter, seeking the lower valleys where the snow is less deep and the browse is more accessible. A single bull elk can provide 300 pounds of meat, enough to feed your little camp for a week or more. But elk are wary, and the deep snow makes them nervous and unpredictable. You spend hours tracking them through the timber, following the big, splayed hoofprints, moving slowly and quietly, pausing frequently to listen. The cold seeps through your clothing as you stand motionless behind a tree, waiting for a shot. Your fingers grow numb inside your fur-lined mittens, and you flex them constantly to maintain enough dexterity to pull the trigger when the moment comes. Some days, the hunting is good, and you return to camp dragging a heavy load of fresh meat on a crude travois, 2 long poles with a buffalo hide stretched between them, pulled behind your horse like a sled. On those days, the camp is festive. The men gather around the fire and feast, roasting thick steaks on sharpened sticks, gnawing on ribs dripping with fat, passing around a section of intestine stuffed with chunks of meat and tallow, a mountain man sausage called boudin that is considered a supreme delicacy. You eat until you cannot eat anymore, until your belly is tight and round and warm, because you have learned that in the mountains, you eat when food is available. There is no guarantee it will be available tomorrow, but some days the hunting is bad. Some days you trudge through the snow for hours, your snowshoes sinking and catching, your legs burning with fatigue and see nothing. No elk, no deer, no sign of any living thing. The mountains are empty, scoured clean by the cold, and the only tracks in the snow are your own, stretching behind you in a long, lonely line. On those days, you return to camp empty-handed and hungry, and the mood around the fire is subdued. The men eat sparingly from the dwindling supply of dried meat, chewing each strip slowly, making it last. Nobody says much. The fire crackles and pops, and the cold presses in from all sides, and you stare into the flames and think about home, about warm kitchens and fresh bread and your mother's cooking and all the things you took for granted before you came to this beautiful, terrible place. The worst part of winter, the part that no one warns you about, is not the cold. It is the boredom. Day after day after day of the same routine. Wake, build fire, eat, gather wood, hunt, eat, sleep. The scenery, magnificent at first, becomes oppressive in its sameness. The same white slopes, the same dark timber, the same frozen river, the same gray sky pressing down. Like a lid on a pot, you have no books, no newspapers, no letters from home. The only entertainment is conversation, and after weeks of telling and retelling every story you know, the conversations begin to thin and fray. You learn intimate details about your companions' lives, their childhood dogs, their first loves, their opinions on every conceivable subject, until you know them better than you know yourself, and their voices become as familiar and annoying as the ringing in your own ears. The veterans cope with the boredom in various ways. Some gamble, playing cards made from scraps of rawhide painted with charcoal, betting beaver pelts and personal possessions on games of chance that can last for hours. The stakes are real, and tempers occasionally flare. You witness two men come to blows over a disputed hand of cards, rolling in the snow and pounding each other until Fitzpatrick separates them with a sharp word and a loaded rifle. "Next man who fights loses his traps," he says flatly, and that ends it. Losing your traps is a death sentence in economic terms, and everyone knows it. Others occupy themselves with crafts. They carve pipes from soft soapstone, decorate their powder horns with intricate designs scratched into the surface with the point of a knife, or sew elaborate beadwork onto their clothing, a skill learned from the Indian women. One man in your brigade, a quiet Pennsylvanian named Joseph, spends the entire winter making a pair of beaded moccasins for a Shoshone girl he met at the last rendezvous. The moccasins are exquisite, covered in tiny glass beads arranged in floral patterns of red, white, and blue, and the other men tease Joseph mercilessly about his love-struck devotion. But they also admire his work, and when the moccasins are finished, even the most hardened cynics in the camp have to admit they are beautiful. Storytelling is the great winter pastime of the mountain men. Around the fire, in the long evenings when the dark comes early and the cold makes sleep difficult, the men tell stories. And oh, what stories they tell! These are not the polished literary tales of drawing rooms and universities. They are raw, vivid, profane accounts of personal experience, of encounters with grizzly bears, of desperate battles with Blackfoot warriors, of miraculous escapes from certain death. The details are specific and unforgettable. The sound a grizzly's jaw makes when it clamps down on your shoulder, the way a Blackfoot arrow wobbles in flight just before it hits you, the peculiar metallic taste of fear when you realize you are completely lost in a blizzard. The men embellish freely, and nobody minds. Exaggeration is not lying, it is performance. A good storyteller is prized in winter camp almost as highly as a good hunter, because his stories feed the mind the way meat feeds the body. Your favorite storyteller is an old trapper named Caleb. Nobody knows his last name, or if they do, nobody uses it. Caleb claims to have been in the mountains since 1808, which would make him one of the very first American trappers in the Rockies. And while some of the details of his stories strain credulity, there is no question that he has seen things that would make a younger man's hair turn white. Caleb's specialty is ghost stories, not the theatrical, Melodramatic ghost stories of Eastern fiction, but quiet, understated tales of strange occurrences in the wilderness, unexplained lights moving through the timber at night, voices calling from empty canyons, the feeling of being watched by something that leaves no tracks. He tells these stories in a low, steady voice, his face half lit by the fire, and by the time he finishes, even the toughest men in camp are glancing nervously over their shoulders into the surrounding darkness. "The mountains remember everything," Caleb says, poking the fire with a stick. "Every man who ever died out here is still wandering around, looking for his way home." This is not a comforting thought when you are lying in your buffalo robes at midnight, listening to the wind howl through the canyon like a chorus of lost souls. The cold deepens as December wears on, settling into the valley like something permanent and immovable. You wake one morning to find that the water in your tin cup, left beside the fire, has frozen solid overnight, even though the embers were still glowing when you fell asleep. The thermometer, if you had one, which you do not, would read somewhere around 30 below zero. At this temperature, exposed skin freezes in minutes. The moisture in your nostrils crystallizes with each breath, forming tiny needles of ice that prick the inside of your nose. The air itself feels thick and heavy, as though the cold has given it weight and substance. When you step outside the shelter, the cold hits you like a physical blow, squeezing your chest, making your lungs burn, bringing tears to your eyes that freeze on your cheeks before they can roll halfway down your face. You learn, through painful experience, the hierarchy of cold. At 0 degrees, the cold is manageable, unpleasant, but not dangerous, so long as you keep moving and keep your extremities covered. 10 below, the cold becomes aggressive, seeking out every gap in your clothing, every exposed patch of skin, with the focused malevolence of a hunting predator. At 20 below, the cold is an enemy. Your body draws blood away from your fingers and toes, concentrating its warmth around your vital organs, and the first tingling numbness of frostbite begins to creep into your extremities. At 30 below, the cold is potentially lethal. A man caught without shelter, in 30 below blizzard has perhaps an hour to live, maybe less if the wind is blowing. At 40 below, and yes, it reaches 40 below in the high valleys of the Rockies and occasionally drops even lower, the cold becomes something almost supernatural, a force so extreme that it seems to bend the rules of ordinary experience. At 40 below, a cup of boiling water thrown into the air will freeze before it hits the ground, bursting into a shower of ice crystals that hang in the air like diamond dust. At 40 below, a green log thrown onto a fire will hiss and crack and split as the sap inside it freezes and expands faster than the flames can thaw it. At 40 below, your Hawken rifle, if left outside overnight, becomes so cold that the metal contracts and the lock mechanism stiffens, and you must warm the gun slowly by the fire before it will function. Slowly, because heating it too fast can crack the barrel. The mountain men develop an intimate adversarial relationship with the cold. They respect it the way a sailor respects the sea, not with fear exactly, but with a deep, abiding awareness of its power and its indifference. The cold does not hate you. It does not want to kill you. It simply does not care whether you live or die, and this neutrality is somehow more terrifying than active malice. The cold is there, always there, pressing in from every direction, patient and inexhaustible, waiting for you to make a mistake. And you will make mistakes. Everyone does. The question is whether your mistakes will cost you a finger or your life. The clothing of a mountain man in winter is a carefully assembled system of layered insulation, refined through years of trial and error and borrowing heavily from the native peoples who have lived in this cold for centuries. Next to your skin, you wear a cotton or linen shirt, if you still have one. Many trappers have long since worn out their eastern clothing and replaced it entirely with buckskin, which is tougher but less comfortable against the skin. Over this goes a buckskin hunting shirt, long-sleeved and reaching to mid-thigh, belted at the waist with a leather sash from which hang your knife, your possible bag, and your fire-making kit. The hunting shirt is often fringed along the sleeves and hem, not for decoration, as many people assume, but for a practical purpose. The fringes serve as ready-made ties and patches. If you need a short length of leather to repair a moccasin or tie a bundle, you simply cut a fringe from your shirt. Your leggings are also buckskin, fitted closely to the leg and tied to your belt with thongs. In winter, you might wear 2 pairs, one over the other, with dried grass stuffed between them for additional insulation. Your moccasins are the most critical piece of your winter wardrobe. A well-made pair of winter moccasins, fashioned from thick buffalo hide with the hair left on the inside, stuffed with dried grass or shredded cedar bark, and fitted with high tops that tie around the calf, can keep your feet warm in temperatures that would destroy a pair of eastern boots within a day. You go through moccasins at an alarming rate. A pair lasts perhaps a week of hard use before the soles wear through, and making new ones is a constant chore. The best moccasin makers in the mountains are the Indian women, and many trappers who have married into the tribes rely on their wives to keep them shod through the winter. Over everything goes your capote, a heavy blanket coat, usually made from a Hudson's Bay Company point blanket, that iconic cream-colored wool blanket with its distinctive colored stripes. The capote is cut simply, with a hood and belted at the waist. It is warm, wind-resistant, and nearly waterproof when the wool fibers swell with moisture. A good capote is one of the most prized possessions a trapper can own, and a man who shows up at rendezvous wearing a fine one is regarded with envious respect. On your hands, you wear mittens made of beaver or buffalo fur, and on your head a fur cap, beaver, fox, or otter, with flaps that pull down to cover your ears and the back of your neck. Historians still argue whether the famous coonskin cap, that iconic image of the frontier, was actually common among mountain men or was largely a later invention of popular culture. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Some men wore coonskin caps, and some did not, and the choice had more to do with what was available than with any particular fashion statement. Christmas arrives, though you would not know it if someone did not mention the date. There is no calendar in camp, and the days have blurred together into a featureless progression of cold, and hunger, and routine. But someone, probably Caleb, who keeps a rough tally of the days by cutting notches in a stick, announces that it is December 25th, and the camp stirs with a feeble attempt at celebration. There is no tree, no presents, no church service, no caroling. What there is, if you are lucky, is a slightly larger meal than usual, and perhaps a small ration of whiskey doled out from the carefully hoarded supply that Fitzpatrick has been saving for exactly this occasion. The whiskey is cheap and fiery, the kind that burns going down and settles in your stomach like a small coal. Back in St. Louis, they call it Tao's Lightning, raw grain alcohol flavored with tobacco juice, red peppers, and whatever else the distiller had on hand. It is, by any civilized standard, terrible, but after weeks of nothing but cold water and melted snow, it tastes like nectar. The men pass the jug around the fire, each taking a careful sip, not too much, because there will not be more until the summer rendezvous. And a man without whiskey in the mountains is a man without one of his few remaining comforts. The Christmas whiskey loosens tongues, and the men grow nostalgic. They talk about home, about the places and people they left behind, the lives they might have lived if they had not answered Ashley's advertisement and headed west. A young trapper from Vermont describes his mother's Christmas dinner in such loving detail, the roast goose, the mashed turnips, the apple pie with cream, that several men around the fire visibly wince with longing. Another man, a Kentuckian named Sam, recites the Lord's Prayer from memory, his voice rough and halting, and when he finishes, there is a long silence broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of a wolf. These are hard men, men who kill and butcher animals with their bare hands, who have fought hand-to-hand with hostile warriors, who have endured privations that would destroy most ordinary humans. But they are also men who miss their mothers, and the combination of whiskey and Christmas and loneliness brings that vulnerability briefly to the surface before the protective shell of toughness closes over it again. Joe Meek, the irrepressible young Virginian who will later become famous as a frontier storyteller and politician, is in a camp much like yours this Christmas. Perhaps not this exact year, but in one of the winters he spent in the Rockies during the late 1820s and early 1830s. Meek's Christmas story, as he later told it to his biographer Francis Victor, is one of the most vivid accounts of a mountain man's winter holiday. He and a small party had been camped on the banks of the Yellowstone, in a valley so deep with snow that hunting was nearly impossible. They had eaten their last buffalo meat days ago and were subsisting on strips of dried rawhide. On Christmas Eve, they managed to shoot a single skinny rabbit, which they divided among 8 men. Meek's share was one hind leg, about the size of a child's fist. He roasted it over the fire, ate it slowly, licked his fingers clean, and pronounced it the finest Christmas dinner a man ever had. He was not being sarcastic. In the mountains, survival is the feast, and still being alive to eat anything at all is cause for genuine celebration. After Christmas, the winter tightens its grip. January is the cruelest month in the Rockies, the month when the deep cold settles in for good, when the snow accumulates to its greatest depth, when the days are shortest and the nights longest, when the game retreats to sheltered pockets that are increasingly difficult to reach. Your food supply dwindles despite the best efforts of the hunters. The elk have moved to lower ground, down in the sagebrush flats along the river, where the snow is shallower and the browsing is better, but they are spooky and hard to approach. The deer have all but vanished, and the buffalo, those great shaggy providers that sustained the mountain men through the warmer months, are wintering on the open plains far to the east, out of reach. You begin to understand, with a clarity that is both terrifying and strangely calming, the mathematical precision of starvation. A grown man engaged in heavy physical labor in extreme cold needs approximately 4,000 calories a day to maintain his body weight and his strength. A pound of lean elk meat provides about 700 calories. A pound of fat provides about 3,600. Without fat, you would need to eat nearly 6 pounds of lean meat every single day, and there simply is not enough game in the valley to provide that quantity of food for 40 men. With fat, you need far less bulk, but fat is the first thing that disappears from the game animals as winter progresses. By January, the elk and deer are lean and stringy, their fat reserves depleted by months of poor forage, and the meat they provide is increasingly inadequate to sustain you. You eat more and more, but feel less and less nourished. Your clothes hang loosely on your shrinking frame. Your belt needs new holes punched in it, and then new holes in the new holes. You are being consumed from within, your body burning its own reserves to generate the heat it needs to stay alive, and the process feels exactly like what it is: a slow, patient devouring. The horses suffer worst of all. By mid-January, the animals are ghastly shadows of what they were in autumn. Rib cages protruding, hip bones jutting through their rough winter coats, eyes dull and sunken. They stand in the shelter of the cottonwood groves, too weak to move, stripping bark from the trunks with a desperate mechanical persistence that is painful to watch. You can count every rib, every vertebra, every knob of bone along their spines. Some of them develop a hacking cough that sounds almost human, and when they breathe, their sides heave with the effort. The mountain men do what they can. They cut cottonwood branches and drag them back to camp for the horses. They scrape snow away from the meadows to expose whatever dried grass lies underneath. They even share their own meager food supplies, a handful of dried meat, a scrap of pemmican, with their animals. But it is not enough. The horses are starving, and nothing short of spring and fresh grass will save them. When a horse dies, and by the end of January, several have, it presents the trappers with a grim but practical opportunity. Horse meat is not the worst thing you have ever eaten. It is tough and stringy and tastes vaguely sweet, with a peculiar aftertaste that lingers unpleasantly on the tongue, but it is food, and in winter camp, food is food. The men butcher the dead horse with the same businesslike efficiency they apply to elk and deer, cutting the meat into strips and hanging it to dry on racks above the fire. Nothing is wasted. The bones are cracked for their marrow, a rich, fatty substance that is almost as valuable as the meat itself. The hide is scraped and saved for moccasins, patches, and repair material. The hooves are boiled into a thin, gelatinous broth that is surprisingly nourishing. Even the intestines are cleaned and used as casings for pemmican sausages. The only parts that go uneaten are the lungs and the contents of the stomach, and even those are fed to the dogs, the rangy, half-wild mongrels that hang around the edges of camp, scavenging scraps and keeping watch for predators. The dogs! You have not thought much about the dogs, but they are an integral part of winter camp life. Every brigade has them. Shaggy, sharp-eared, yellow-eyed beasts of no particular breed, descended from generations of frontier mutts with a generous admixture of wolf blood. The dogs are not pets. They are working animals, sentinels who bark at the approach of strangers, hunting companions who can track wounded game through deep snow, and, in truly desperate times, emergency rations. The mountain men have a dark joke about dogs. A dog is your best friend right up until dinner. Nobody laughs at this joke. It is too close to the truth, but the dogs earn their keep in other ways. At night, when the temperature plunges and the fire burns low, the dogs crawl into the shelter and curl up against you, pressing their warm bodies against yours, and their heat is welcome. Even though they smell like something that died a week ago and was left in the rain, there is a reason the phrase three-dog night entered the language. It refers to a night so cold that you need 3 dogs sleeping on top of you to stay warm. In the Rockies, in January, every night is a 3-dog night. The cold does strange things to the world. You notice it in small ways at first. The way the trees creak and groan, like old men settling into chairs as the wood contracts in the frost. The way the snow surface develops a hard crust that sparkles in the sunlight like a field of broken glass. The way sounds carry impossibly far in the dense, cold air. You can hear a man chopping wood a mile away, each stroke as clear and distinct as if he were standing right beside you. The way the river, frozen solid now, makes eerie, booming noises as the ice expands and shifts, cracking and groaning like some enormous beast turning in its sleep beneath the surface. And then there are the mirages, on very cold days when the temperature drops to 40 below and the air is absolutely still. The cold creates optical illusions that can be disorienting and even dangerous. The mountains seem to float above the horizon, detached from the earth, their bases hidden by a band of shimmering silver light. Trees in the distance appear to be upside down, their branches pointing toward the sky and their trunks reaching into the earth. And sometimes, in the early morning, when the sun is just rising and the light is flat and colorless, you see things that are not there. Buildings, animals, people moving across the snow, phantom images conjured by the refraction of light through layers of air at different temperatures. The trappers call these visions cold dreams, and they learn to ignore them, though the first time you see a non-existent Indian village shimmering on the horizon, your hand goes automatically to your rifle. The nights are the hardest. By 4 in the afternoon, the sun has dropped behind the western rim of the valley, and by 5, it is full dark. The night stretches ahead for 14 hours of cold and darkness, broken only by the circle of firelight and the companionship of your fellow trappers. You eat your evening meal, whatever you have, prepared in whatever way requires the least effort, and settle into your robes for the long wait until morning. Sleep comes in fitful patches, interrupted by the cold, by the need to get up and feed the fire, by the howling of wolves that echoes through the valley with a sound that is simultaneously beautiful and menacing. The wolves are close. You can see their tracks in the snow around camp each morning, but they keep their distance from the fire. They are waiting. They can smell the horses, the dead meat, the garbage of camp, and their patience is endless. February brings no relief. If anything, the cold intensifies, settling into the valley with a permanence that makes you doubt whether spring will ever come. The snow is 6 feet deep on the level now, deeper in the drifts, and the trail from camp to the river, a distance of perhaps 200 yards, is a trench cut through the snow by the daily passage of men and animals. The walls of the trench rise above your head, and walking through it feels like walking through a tunnel made of ice. The sky, visible as a narrow strip of gray above the trench walls, seems impossibly far away. The food situation has become critical. The hunters go out every day, but return empty-handed more often than not. The elk have moved even lower, down into the river bottoms where the cottonwood and willow provide some browse. But they are thin and weak themselves now, and a single animal provides barely enough meat to feed the camp for 2 days. You begin to ration the remaining dried meat and pemmican, dividing it into portions so small they would not satisfy a child. Your stomach is a constant, nagging presence, a hollow ache that nothing seems to fill. You dream about food, vivid, torturous dreams of laden tables and steaming platters and heaping bowls of things you have not tasted in months. You wake from these dreams with your mouth watering and your stomach clenching, and the disappointment is almost worse than the hunger itself. The mountain men have strategies for dealing with extreme hunger. Some are practical. You can eat the inner bark of pine trees, stripping the outer bark away to reveal a thin layer of soft, fibrous tissue that is mildly sweet and contains a modest amount of calories. You can dig for roots beneath the snow, camas, bitterroot, wild turnip, if you know where to look, and the Indian women who live among The trappers are expert root diggers who can find food where a white man sees only empty ground. You can set snares for rabbits and ground squirrels, though in the deep cold, these animals are scarce, and the effort of checking empty snares day after day can be demoralizing. And you can make pemmican, that legendary frontier survival food, by pounding dried meat into powder, mixing it with melted fat and dried berries, and pressing it into dense, calorie-rich cakes that can sustain a man for days on very small portions. The trouble is that pemmican requires fat, and fat is exactly what you do not have. Other strategies are psychological. Caleb, the old storyteller, has a particular technique for dealing with hunger that he swears by. "Do not think about the food you cannot have," he says. "Think about the food you will have come spring. Think about that first buffalo hump roast, dripping with fat, sizzling over a big cottonwood fire. Think about the marrow bones, all hot and rich, that you will crack open and eat with your fingers. Think about the tongue and the liver and the boss ribs. Think about all of it, and let your mind eat even if your stomach cannot." This is either wisdom or madness, and in the deep of winter, the distinction between the two is not always clear. Fitzpatrick, ever the practical leader, makes a decision. He sends a party of 8 men, led by the veteran Jacques Laramie, down the Green River to try to find the buffalo herds that are supposed to be wintering on the plains to the south. It is a desperate gamble. The journey will take at least a week each way, through snow-choked canyons and across frozen rivers, and there is no guarantee that the buffalo will be where they are supposed to be. But the alternative, staying in camp and slowly starving, is worse. Jacques and his men pack their meager supplies, saddle the strongest remaining horses, and ride out of camp on a gray February morning, their figures growing smaller and smaller until they disappear around a bend in the river. You watch them go with a mixture of hope and dread, knowing that if they do not find food, none of you may survive to see the spring. While Jacques is gone, the camp grows quieter. The men move slowly, conserving their energy, speaking in low voices, sleeping as much as they can. Sleep is the body's natural response to starvation. The brain slows everything down, reducing the metabolic rate, shutting down non-essential functions, trying to stretch the remaining reserves as far as they will go. You sleep 10, 12, 14 hours a day, curled in your buffalo robes like a hibernating bear, drifting in and out of consciousness in a kind of waking dream that is neither sleep nor alertness, but something in between. The fire burns constantly, tended by whoever is least asleep, and its warmth is the one reliable comfort in a world that has been stripped of almost everything else. On the 9th day, Jacques and his party return. You hear them before you see them. The faint, distant sound of hoofbeats, muffled by the snow, growing gradually louder. Then they appear around the bend, 8 riders leading a string of pack mules loaded with dark frozen bundles, buffalo meat. They found the herds 30 miles to the south, grazing on the wind-swept plains where the grass pokes through the thin snow cover, and they killed 6 animals, 4 cows and 2 young bulls, and packed as much meat as they could carry. The camp erupts with a joy that borders on delirium. Men who have been listless and silent for days are suddenly shouting, laughing, clapping each other on the back, and when the first chunks of frozen buffalo meat are thrown onto the fire and begin to sizzle and smoke, the smell alone, that rich, heavy, intoxicating aroma of roasting fat, is enough to bring tears to your eyes. You eat with a single-minded intensity that would be embarrassing in polite company, but is perfectly appropriate here, where manners are a luxury nobody can afford. You eat until your stomach, shrunken by weeks of deprivation, protests and threatens to revolt. You eat the prime cuts first. The hump ribs, heavy with fat, the tender loin, the rich, gelatinous marrow scooped from the cracked leg bones, and then you eat the lesser cuts, the flank, the shank, the neck meat, the cheeks, the tongue. You eat the liver, warm and slippery, barely cooked, almost raw, and it is magnificent. The Indians eat liver as medicine, believing it restores strength and vitality, and after weeks of near starvation, you are inclined to agree. You can feel the nourishment spreading through your body like warmth from a fire, reaching into your fingers and toes, filling the hollow spaces, restoring something that you had begun to believe was permanently lost. The buffalo meat changes everything. With food in camp, the mood lifts. The conversations resume. The card games start again, and the long winter nights, while still cold and dark, lose some of their oppressive weight. You still ration the meat carefully. Fitzpatrick insists on it, knowing that the supply must last until the spring thaw. But the portions are generous compared to the starvation rations of the previous weeks, and the knowledge that there is food cached nearby, more where this came from if another expedition becomes necessary, provides a psychological comfort that is almost as nourishing as the meat itself. February inches forward. The days grow slightly longer, the sun slightly higher, the darkness slightly less absolute. You begin to notice small changes in the world around you. The snow on the south-facing slopes has a wet, heavy look that it did not have a month ago. The icicles hanging from the cliff walls drip in the afternoon sun, and the sound of running water, a sound you have not heard in months, trickles faintly from beneath the ice along the river's edge. These are the first tentative signs of spring, and they fill you with a hope so fierce it is almost painful. Spring means warmth, green grass, abundant game, the end of this long siege of cold and hunger. Spring means the rendezvous, that annual gathering of mountain men and Indian bands, at some predetermined location in the Green River country, where you will trade your furs, resupply your outfit, drink whiskey, race horses, tell lies, and feel for a few glorious weeks like a human being again. But spring is not here yet, and the mountains are not done with you. In late February, a storm moves in from the northwest. Not a quick squall, but a sustained 3-day blizzard that buries the valley under an additional 4 feet of snow. The wind howls down through the canyon at 60 miles an hour, driving the snow horizontally, reducing visibility to 0. You cannot see the fire from 3 feet away. You cannot see the man sitting next to you. You hunker in your shelter, piling buffalo robes over your head, listening to the wind scream and the trees crack, and the whole world dissolve into white chaos. The shelter holds, barely, the buffalo hides straining and flapping against the pole frame, snow drifting in through every crack and gap. You lie in your robes, shivering, waiting, and there is nothing to do but wait. When the storm passes, after 3 days and 3 nights, you emerge into a world that has been completely reshaped. The snow is 10 feet deep in places. The trail to the river has vanished. Some of the shelters have been partially or completely buried, and the men dig themselves out like moles, blinking in the sudden, blinding brightness of sunlight on fresh snow. 2 more horses have died during the storm, found standing upright in the snow, frozen solid, their heads still raised, as if they were watching for something that never came. The men regard the dead horses with the flat, pragmatic gaze of survivors. "More meat," says Ezra, and reaches for his skinning knife. March arrives, and with it, the first real thaw. The transformation is gradual at first, a degree or 2 warmer each day, a bit more sunshine, a bit more dripping and trickling, and then it accelerates rapidly, as though someone has turned up a dial. The snow begins to melt in earnest, filling the Green River with a torrent of muddy, ice-choked water that rises higher each day, flooding the low-lying meadows and turning the valley floor into a vast, shallow lake. The ice on the river breaks up with spectacular violence, huge slabs of it grinding and crashing against each other, pushed downstream by the rising water with a noise like cannon fire. You stand on the bank and watch the breakup with a mixture of awe and relief. The river is alive again. The world is alive again. Winter is losing its grip. The first green shoots appear on the hillsides, tiny, fragile, impossibly brave spikes of grass poking through the brown mat of last year's growth, and you stare at them with the intensity of a man seeing a miracle. Green! You had almost forgotten the color existed. The cottonwood trees begin to bud, their branches flushing with a pale, translucent green that glows in the spring sunlight like stained glass. Birds return, meadowlarks and blackbirds and the raucous, arguing magpies that strut through camp like they own the place. The elk drift back up from the lowlands, looking thin and rough but alive, their coats patchy with the remnants of their winter hair. And the beaver, those industrious, flat-tailed engineers whose pelts are the entire reason you are here, begin to stir in their lodges, preparing for the spring season that will bring them out into the streams and directly into the path of your waiting traps. Spring trapping begins, and with it, a renewal of purpose that pulls you out of the lethargy of winter camp like a hand pulling you from deep water. You are back in the streams, wading through water so cold it makes your teeth ache, setting your traps with numb fingers, checking them each morning with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The beaver are active now, repairing their dams, building new lodges, cutting saplings along the stream banks, and the familiar slap of a beaver tail on water, that sharp, startling crack that sounds like a pistol shot, echoes through the canyons at dawn and dusk. Each morning you wade out to your trapline, and each morning the icy water rises to your waist, to your chest, sometimes to your neck, and you gasp and curse and set your jaw and keep going because each beaver pelt is money, and money is the only reason you are here. But even as you trap, the lessons of winter remain with you. You have learned things about yourself that you did not know before, things about your capacity for endurance, your tolerance for discomfort, your ability to function, on levels of food and warmth that would have seemed impossible a year ago. You have learned that the human body is both more fragile and more resilient than you ever imagined. It can be destroyed by a single night of exposure, by a moment of carelessness with fire or rifle or river. But it can also survive weeks of near starvation, months of sub-zero cold, the kind of sustained physical punishment that seems, in retrospect, almost beyond belief. You have become, without quite realizing it, a mountain man, not a greenhorn playing at frontier life, but a genuine seasoned veteran of the high country, with the skills and the scars and the hard-won knowledge to prove it. You have also learned something about the relationship between humans and the natural world that your Eastern upbringing did not prepare you for. Back east, nature is something you look at through a window, something you pass through on your way. From one settlement to another, something you admire in paintings and poems. Here, nature is not scenery. It is the medium in which you live, the substance that sustains you and threatens you, the force that shapes every moment of every day. You do not observe the weather, you inhabit it. You do not admire the landscape, you survive it. And this intimate, daily engagement with the physical world, this constant negotiation between your body and the land, has given you a kind of knowledge that cannot be acquired from books or lectures or second-hand accounts. You know the difference between the call of a bull elk in rut and the call of one in alarm. You know the smell of an approaching blizzard, that particular metallic tang in the air that means snow is coming, and you can estimate its severity by the behavior of the animals, the way the birds go quiet, the way the elk drift toward the timber, the way the dogs curl up tight and tuck their noses under their tails. You know the feel of the ground beneath your moccasins, the way frozen earth sounds different from thawed earth, the way the snow changes texture and consistency as the temperature fluctuates. You have become, in a real and tangible sense, a part of the landscape, adapted to it as surely as the elk and the beaver and the wolves. The Ute Indians camped at the lower end of Brown's Hole have been watching you all winter with a mixture of curiosity and quiet amusement. The Utes are experienced winter people. They have been surviving Rocky Mountain winters for countless generations, long before the first white trapper ever set foot in these mountains. And they regard the mountain men's struggles with the bemused patience of experts watching amateurs fumble their way through a familiar task. The Ute women, in particular, have been helpful. Several of them have attached themselves to the trapping brigade, forming relationships with individual trappers that range from casual barter arrangements to genuine marriages. These women bring with them a body of knowledge about winter survival that is deeper and more sophisticated than anything the trappers have learned on their own. A Ute woman named Running Deer, at least that is the English translation of her name that the trappers use, has been teaching you to make pemmican the proper way, pounding dried buffalo meat with a smooth river stone until it is a fine powder, mixing it with rendered fat and dried service berries, and pressing it into rawhide pouches that can be stored for months. She shows you how to line your moccasins with the inner fluff of cattail plants, which provides insulation nearly as effective as down. She demonstrates the technique of heating smooth river stones in the fire and placing them inside the shelter to radiate warmth through the night, supplementing the fire without the risk of sparks and smoke. She teaches you to read the winter sky, to predict storms by the shape and movement of the clouds, to gauge the temperature by the color of the sunset, to navigate in a whiteout by following the direction of the wind and the texture of the snowdrifts, which are always shaped by the prevailing wind and can serve as a crude but reliable compass when visibility drops to zero. This knowledge, passed from the native peoples to the mountain men and integrated into the trapper's own hard-won experience, is one of the most important but least celebrated aspects of the fur trade era. The mountain men did not survive the Rockies alone. They survived because they learned from the people who had been there first, people who had spent thousands of years developing the skills and technologies and cultural practices necessary to thrive in one of the most demanding environments on the continent. Historians still argue whether this cultural exchange was primarily cooperative or exploitative, and the answer is probably both, a complicated tangle of mutual benefit and mutual harm that defies simple categorization. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. You are still in Brown's Hole, still trapping, still learning, and the spring of 1829 is slowly unfolding around you like a flower opening in the sun. The snow retreats up the mountainsides day by day, revealing the brown, matted grass of the valley floor and the first tentative wildflowers. Tiny purple crocuses and yellow glacier lilies that push through the soil almost before the snow has finished melting. The air warms. The streams swell with meltwater, and the world comes alive with a vitality that feels almost aggressive after the long dormancy of winter. Butterflies appear. Insects hum. The cottonwood trees unfurl their leaves with a green so vivid it looks freshly painted. And everywhere, in every pond and stream and marshy meadow, the beaver are busy and your traps are full, and the pile of stretched pelts in your camp grows larger by the day. The spring trapping season is intense, but mercifully brief. 6 weeks, maybe 8, before the warming water makes the beaver pelts thin and worthless. By early June, the trapping is done, and Fitzpatrick gives the order to pack up and head for the rendezvous. The rendezvous this year is to be held at Pierre's Hole, a broad, beautiful valley on the west side of the Teton Range in what is now eastern Idaho. Pierre's Hole, named for an old Iroquois trapper called Pierre Tivanitagon, whom the French-Canadian trappers simply called Pierre, is one of the most spectacular settings in the entire Rocky Mountain region. The Tetons rise from the valley, floor like a wall of granite and ice, their jagged peaks piercing the sky at nearly 14,000 feet, their flanks streaked with snow and shadow and the dark green of alpine forest. The valley itself is flat and green and watered by numerous clear streams, with excellent grass for the horses and enough timber on the surrounding slopes to provide firewood and shelter for the hundreds of men and thousands of horses and mules that will converge here over the coming weeks. The ride to Pierre's Hole takes 10 days, through a landscape that is transforming from winter to summer with breathtaking speed. You cross high passes where the snow still lies deep in the shadows, but the south-facing slopes are ablaze with wildflowers, lupine and Indian paintbrush and columbine, splashes of blue and red and yellow against the dark green of the conifers. You ford swollen rivers, the water chest-deep and powerful with snowmelt, the horses stumbling and snorting as the current tries to sweep them downstream. You ride through meadows where herds of elk graze in the long evening light, their calves wobbling beside them on legs that seem too long and too thin for their bodies. The air smells of pine resin and damp earth and new growth. And after the confinement and privation of winter, the sense of space and freedom is intoxicating. You arrive at Pierre's Hole in mid-June, and the rendezvous is already underway. The valley is dotted with camps, trapping brigades, free trappers, Indian bands, spread along the streams for miles. There are several hundred mountain men here, along with their Indian wives and families, and the Nez Perce and Flathead Indians who have come to trade horses and buffalo robes for the white man's goods. The supply caravan from St. Louis has arrived, its wagons loaded with everything the mountain men need and crave: gunpowder and lead, steel traps, blankets, knives, tobacco, coffee, sugar, flour, and above all, whiskey. The trading and socializing that follow will last for 2 to 3 weeks, and they represent the mountain man's one annual opportunity to resupply, socialize, and blow off the accumulated tension of a year in the wilderness. The rendezvous is part trade fair, part carnival, and part debauched celebration of the fact that you are still alive. The trading comes first. You bring your carefully accumulated beaver pelts to the company agent, who examines each one with the practiced eye of a diamond merchant, grading them by size, thickness, and condition. A+ pelt, large, thick, perfectly prepared, fetches the top price. A-, small, thin, poorly stretched, fetches considerably less. The agent records your total in his ledger and credits your account with the mountain prices, which are approximately 4 times higher than what the same goods would cost in St. Louis. A pound of coffee that cost 15 cents back east will cost you $2 at Rendezvous. A yard of cloth, 20 cents in St. Louis, cost you $6 here. Gallon of whiskey, $1 in civilization, costs you $5 in the mountains. The company makes its real profit not from buying your furs cheaply, but from selling you supplies expensively. And by the time you have outfitted yourself for the coming year, most or all of what you earned from your pelts has gone right back into the company's coffers. It is a system designed to keep the trapper perpetually in debt, perpetually dependent on the company, and perpetually returning to the mountains for just one more season that will finally make him rich. But right now, standing in the bright June sunshine of Pierre's hole with a tin cup of whiskey in your hand and the sound of fiddle music drifting across the meadow, you do not care about the economics. You are alive. You survived the winter. You have your health, most of your fingers, all of your toes, and enough beaver pelts to pay for the outfit you need and still have a little left over for whiskey and gambling and the general reckless expenditure of energy and money that characterizes the rendezvous. The mountain men call this annual blowout the Big Spree, and the name is entirely accurate. For 2 or 3 weeks, these ordinarily cautious, frugal, self-disciplined men abandon all restraint and indulge themselves with a ferocity that is startling to witness. The whiskey flows first and most freely. The company supplies gallons of the stuff, raw, harsh, barely drinkable spirits that have been diluted with river water and flavored with whatever the traders had on hand: tobacco, red pepper, molasses, ginger. The mountain men drink it with an enthusiasm born of months of enforced sobriety, and the results are predictable. Fights break out. Men who are close friends during the trapping season become sworn enemies over a cup of bad whiskey and a perceived slight. Wrestling matches, horse races, and shooting contests dissolve into brawls. A man wakes up in the morning with a black eye, a splitting headache, and no memory of how he acquired either. The experienced traders know to conduct their business early in the rendezvous, before the serious drinking begins, because a man who has been drinking for 3 days is not a reliable trading partner. But the rendezvous is not all whiskey and fighting. It is also the mountain man's one opportunity for genuine social interaction beyond the small circle of his trapping brigade. Men who have not seen each other for a year exchange news, stories, and gossip with the urgency of castaways who have just been rescued. Who died this winter? Who married an Indian woman? Who discovered a new beaver stream? Who fought the Blackfeet? And how did it go? The information flows freely, building a collective picture of the state of the fur trade that is more comprehensive and more accurate than anything you could learn from the newspapers back east, if you had access to newspapers, which you do not. The Indian camps are a world unto themselves. The Nez Perce, with their beautifully spotted Appaloosa horses and their elaborate feathered headdresses, are magnificent. The Flathead, quiet and dignified, are skilled traders who know the value of their goods and bargain shrewdly. The Indian women are busy from morning to night, cooking, tanning hides, making moccasins, beading clothing, and their camps are models of orderly efficiency compared to the chaotic sprawl of the trappers' encampments. The children run everywhere, playing games that seem to be universal among children of all cultures: tag, hide and seek, pretend battles with stick weapons. You watch a group of Nez Perce boys playing a game that involves throwing a sharpened stick at a rolling hoop, and the skill and precision they display is remarkable. These boys will grow up to be warriors and hunters, and the games they play are not merely entertainment, but training for the lives they will lead. You spend a pleasant afternoon trading with a Flathead woman who has a particularly fine pair of winter moccasins, heavy buffalo hide, hair on the inside, beautifully beaded across the toe, that you know will be invaluable when winter comes again. She wants tobacco for them, a lot of tobacco, and you bargain back and forth through a combination of sign language, broken French, and mutual stubbornness until you arrive at a price that satisfies neither of you completely, which means it is a fair deal. You also acquire a new capote, replacing the one you wore through the winter, which is now so stained and torn and patched that it looks like something a scarecrow would reject. The new capote is bright and clean, a cream-colored Hudson's Bay blanket with broad red and green stripes, and you put it on and feel, for the first time in many months, almost respectable. As the rendezvous winds down, the mood shifts from celebration to preparation. The men who are returning to the mountains, and most of them are, because what else would they do, begin to assemble their outfits for the coming year. New traps, new powder, new lead, new knives, new moccasins, new blankets. The process is both exciting and sobering because each item you pack represents a bet on your own survival. You are buying the tools you will need to stay alive through another trapping season, another summer, another fall, and, inevitably, another winter. You know what winter means now. You have felt the cold in your bones, tasted the desperation of hunger, watched horses die in the snow, and listened to the wind howl through a frozen valley at 3 in the morning. You know, with a certainty that is both terrifying and strangely liberating, that the winter will try to kill you again, and that surviving it will require everything you have. Fitzpatrick gathers the brigade on the last day of the rendezvous. "Same plan as last year, boys," he says, his voice carrying easily over the assembled men. Fall trap on the Wind River, winter in Brown's Hole, or wherever looks best, spring trap on the Green and the Bear. Any questions? There are none. The plan is simple, familiar, and potentially fatal, and nobody needs it explained twice. You saddle your horse, lash your packs to the mule, and ride out of Pierre's Hole with the brigade, heading east toward the Wind River country and the fall trapping season. Behind you, the rendezvous site is already emptying, the camps being struck, the fires going cold, the trampled meadows slowly recovering. In a few weeks, there will be no sign that several hundred people gathered here, drank whiskey, swapped stories, fell in love, and prepared themselves, once again, for the beautiful and terrible business of living in the mountains. The fall trapping season passes in a blur of cold water and beaver pelts and the gradual, inexorable approach of winter. You know the signs now, the way the aspen leaves turn gold and then drop in a single day, like coins spilling from a torn purse. The way the elk begin to bugle in the high meadows, their eerie, whistling calls echoing off the canyon walls at dawn and dusk. The way the air acquires a bite, a sharpness, that was not there yesterday, and the way the first thin skin of ice appears on the still water of the beaver ponds, delicate as glass and just as easily broken. The mountains are warning you. Winter is coming. You have perhaps 3 weeks to get your traps out of the water, pack your pelts, and find a sheltered valley before the snow locks you in for good. This year, Fitzpatrick decides against Brown's Hole. Word has reached the brigade that the Ute and Shoshone bands, who usually winter there, have been pushed out by a large party of hostile Arapaho, and the valley may not be safe. Instead, Fitzpatrick heads for the upper Wind River country, into a broad timbered valley sheltered by the Absaroka Range to the north and the Wind River Mountains to the south. The valley is at about 7,000 feet, higher than Brown's Hole, and therefore colder, but it has abundant timber, good grass, and a resident population of elk and mule deer that should provide food through the winter. There is also a band of friendly Crow Indians camped at the far end of the valley, and the Crow, who are famous for their hospitality and their magnificent horses, are generally welcoming to the mountain men. The Crow are fascinating people. They call themselves the Apsayaluka, the children of the large-beaked bird, and their homeland encompasses much of present-day southern Montana and northern Wyoming. They are superb horsemen, possibly the finest riders on the entire continent, and their horse herds are legendary. A wealthy Crow warrior might own 30 or 40 horses, and the tribe as a whole possesses thousands. The Crow women are skilled leather workers, producing some of the most beautiful and elaborate beadwork and quill work in the Plains Indian tradition. And their teepees, constructed from carefully tanned buffalo hides stretched over lodgepole pine frames, are works of functional art. Warm, weatherproof, and elegantly proportioned. Several of the mountain men in your brigade have Crow wives, and through these women, you gain access to Crow winter camp life. A Crow teepee in winter is remarkably warm and comfortable, far more so than the crude, half-faced camps the trappers build for themselves. The teepee is essentially a cone of carefully prepared buffalo hides, 15 to 20 feet in diameter at the base, supported by a framework of peeled lodgepole pine saplings. The genius of the design lies in its ventilation system. 2 flaps at the top of the teepee, controlled by exterior poles, can be adjusted to regulate the draft, allowing smoke from the central fire to escape while preventing wind and rain from entering. An interior liner, hung from the poles about 4 feet above the ground, creates a dead air space between the liner and the outer wall that provides excellent insulation. The floor is covered with buffalo robes and woven rush mats, and the fire pit at the center is ringed with stones that absorb heat and radiate it back into the living space long after the fire has died down. On a night when the outside temperature drops to 30 below, the temperature inside a well-maintained crow teepee can be a surprisingly comfortable 40 or 50 degrees. The women keep the fire burning low and steady, feeding it with dry cottonwood and willow and supplementing it with heated stones that they transfer from the fire to strategic locations around the sleeping area. The air inside the teepee is warm and dry, lightly scented with wood smoke and the faintly sweet smell of tanned hides. And the firelight plays across the painted designs on the liner. Horses, buffalo, warriors, eagles, creating a shifting, hypnotic display of light and shadow that lulls you toward sleep. You begin spending your evenings in the crow camp, drawn by the warmth, the food, and the company. The crow are generous hosts. They share their food freely with the trappers: dried buffalo meat, pemmican, roasted camas roots, and a delicious corn mush made from dried corn obtained through trade with the agricultural tribes to the east. They are also enthusiastic conversationalists, communicating with the trappers through a combination of sign language, Pidgin French, and the smattering of crow language that the mountain men have picked up over the years. The talk ranges widely: hunting stories, war stories, gossip about mutual acquaintances, arguments about the relative merits of different horse breeds, and spirited debates about religion, politics, and the nature of the world. That would not be out of place in a university seminar, despite the fact that none of the participants can read or write. The crow have their own ways of coping with winter, refined over centuries of experience, and watching them is an education. They move their entire camp every few weeks, shifting to fresh pastures for the horse herd and fresh supplies of firewood. This is a massive logistical undertaking, dismantling dozens of teepees, loading everything onto travois pulled by horses, moving women, children, elders, dogs, and the entire material culture of the tribe across miles of frozen landscape. And it is accomplished with an efficiency and coordination that amazes you. The entire camp can be packed, moved 10 miles, and reassembled in a single day. And the crow women, who do most of the packing and unpacking, perform this work with a practiced speed that makes it look effortless. The crow horse herd is at the center of everything. The horses are the tribe's wealth, their transportation, their military advantage, and their pride. In winter, keeping the herd alive and healthy is a full-time job. The crow herders drive the horses to sheltered valleys where the snow is shallow and the grass is accessible, moving them frequently to prevent overgrazing. They break the ice on streams and ponds so the horses can drink. They cut cottonwood branches by the hundreds, stripping the bark and feeding it to the animals. And when blizzards strike, the herders bring the most valuable horses, the war horses, the buffalo runners, the breeding mares, inside the camp, sheltering them behind windbreaks of stacked brush and hide, and sometimes bringing them right into the teepees themselves, where they stand steaming and stamping in the warm, smoky air while the humans huddle around them. You learn from the crow the art of reading animal behavior as a weather indicator, something that goes far beyond the rough rules of thumb the trappers have developed on their own. The crow observe the elk with particular care, noting how deeply they bed down in the snow, how early they rise, which direction they face when they stand. An elk facing into the wind is expecting weather from that direction. An elk bedded deeply in timber, with its nose tucked under its flank, is anticipating a major storm. Horses behave differently too. A horse that turns its hindquarters to the northwest and hunches its back is bracing for a cold front that may arrive within hours. Even the birds are informative. The Clark's nutcracker, a noisy gray and black bird common in the high country, becomes agitated and vocal before a storm. And its frantic caching behavior, hiding pine seeds in the ground at a furious rate, suggests that it somehow senses the severity of the approaching weather. The crow also teach you about the spiritual dimension of winter, which the mountain men, with their practical, materialistic mindset, tend to overlook. For the crow, winter is not merely a season of hardship to be endured, but a sacred time, a period of reflection and renewal when the world retreats into itself, gathers its strength, and prepares for the rebirth of spring. The long winter nights are filled with storytelling, not the casual, anecdotal tales the trappers tell around their campfires, but formal, ceremonial narratives that carry the weight of religious scripture. These are the origin stories, The creation myths, the tales of Old Man Coyote and the other powerful beings who shaped the world and gave the people their laws. The stories are told by the elders, speaking from memory in cadences polished by generations of repetition, and they are listened to with a reverence and attention that transforms the smoky interior of the teepee into something resembling a cathedral. You sit in a crow teepee on a bitter January night, wrapped in a buffalo robe, listening to an old man whose name translates roughly as seas far away tell the story of how winter came into the world. The gist of the story, as you understand it through the imperfect medium of sign language and whispered translation, is that winter is a gift from the spirit world. A gift that seems harsh, but is in fact necessary, because without winter, the earth would never rest, the rivers would never be cleansed, the animals would never sleep, and the world would eventually exhaust itself and die. Winter, in the crow understanding, is the earth's way of breathing in, of drawing itself inward, of renewing its strength for the explosive abundance of spring. It is not punishment. It is not suffering. It is the natural and necessary rhythm of a living world. You are not sure you believe this. Your frozen toes and empty stomach suggest a rather less poetic interpretation. But there is something in the old man's words, or perhaps in the way he says them, with a calm certainty that seems to come from someplace deeper than mere opinion, that lodges in your mind and stays there, turning over and over like a stone in a stream, slowly smoothing and reshaping the way you think about the cold and the darkness and the long, difficult process of surviving until spring. The second winter is in many ways easier than the first. You know what to expect. You have the skills, the equipment, the knowledge, and the psychological resilience to face the cold without the blind panic of the inexperienced. You build your shelter more efficiently, insulate it more thoroughly, stock it with more firewood and more dried meat. You hunt more effectively, tracking game with a confidence and competence that would have been impossible a year ago. You manage your food supply more carefully, rationing it from the start rather than waiting until the crisis is upon you. And when the deep cold comes, and it comes as inevitably as gravity, as certain as death, you face it with a grim, practiced composure that the veterans around you recognize and approve. But the mountains always have one more lesson to teach, and this winter's lesson arrives in the form of a Blackfoot war party. The Blackfoot Confederacy, the Piegan, the Blood, and the Siksika are the most feared warriors on the northern plains and in the northern Rockies, and their hostility toward the American trappers is deep, sustained, and frequently lethal. Unlike the Crow, the Shoshone, and the Flathead, who have generally found it in their interest to cooperate with the mountain men, the Blackfoot regard the trappers as invaders, as men who are stripping the beaver from the streams that the Blackfoot consider their own, upsetting the delicate balance of trade and territory that has sustained the northern tribes for generations. They are not wrong. The attack comes at dawn, on a gray February morning when the snow is falling in thick, silent curtains and visibility is less than 100 yards. You are woken by the dogs, not barking but growling, a low, sustained rumble that stands every hair on the back of your neck straight up. You grab your rifle, which you keep loaded and primed beside your bed at all times, and roll out of your shelter just in time to see dark figures materializing out of the snowfall at the edge of camp. They are moving fast, in a low, crouching run, and they are heading for the horse herd. Fitzpatrick's voice cuts through the confusion like a whip crack. "Blackfoot! Fort up! Fort up!" The brigade responds with a speed and coordination born of long practice. You and the other men sprint for the nearest defensible position, a cluster of cottonwood trees whose thick trunks provide cover, and begin firing into the dim shapes in the snow. The Blackfoot are not staging a full-scale assault. This is a horse raid, and their primary objective is to stampede and steal as many horses as possible. They succeed in cutting about 15 head from the herd and driving them into the snowfall before the trappers can mount an organized defense. 2 trappers are wounded, one with an arrow in his thigh, the other with a ball from a trade musket that grazes his ribs. And 1 Blackfoot warrior lies motionless in the snow at the edge of camp, his body already being covered by the falling snow. The aftermath of the raid is somber. The loss of 15 horses is a serious blow, reducing the brigade's mobility and its ability to pack supplies and pelts. The wounded men are tended to. The arrow is cut out with a skinning knife, the wound packed with a poultice of chewed tobacco and beaver castoreum, which the mountain men believe has healing properties, and the dead Blackfoot warrior is left where he fell, as a warning. Fitzpatrick doubles the guard and sends scouts out to track the war party, but the falling snow has covered their trail, and after a few miles, the scouts return empty-handed. The Blackfoot have vanished into the white wilderness as completely as if they had never existed. The threat of Indian attack adds a new dimension to winter, survival that you had not fully appreciated during your first winter in the relatively peaceful environment of Brown's Hole. Here, in the Wind River country, you are in contested territory, a region claimed by the Crow, the Shoshone, the Blackfoot, and the Arapaho, all of whom have complex and often hostile relationships with each other and with the white trappers. The mountain men navigate this political landscape with a mixture of diplomacy, alliance building, and naked force, and the results are unpredictable. A band that is friendly one season may be hostile the next, depending on shifting alliances, trade disputes, or the personal ambitions of individual chiefs. The only constant is uncertainty, and the only reliable protection is vigilance. The guard rotation becomes the central organizing principle of camp life. 2 men are always on watch, positioned at opposite ends of the camp, their rifles loaded, their eyes scanning the tree line and the snow-covered approaches for any sign of movement. The watches run 4 hours each, from dusk to dawn, and standing guard in the deep cold of a mountain winter night is one of the most miserable experiences imaginable. You stand in the darkness, your back to a tree, your buffalo robe pulled tight around your shoulders, your rifle cradled in your arms, and you stare into the black and white emptiness of the winter landscape until your eyes ache. The cold seeps through your clothing, through your skin, through your muscles, into your very bones, and the temptation to move, to stamp your feet, to walk around and warm up is constant and almost irresistible. But you do not move, because movement means noise, and noise means the enemy knows where you are. The nights are long and filled with sounds that require interpretation. The crack of a branch breaking under the weight of snow, or under the weight of a man, the crunch of footsteps in the snow, human or animal. The low, guttural call of an owl, real or a signal between warriors. You learn to distinguish between the sounds of the natural world and the sounds of human intrusion, and you learn it quickly because a mistake in interpretation can be fatal. The veterans have a saying, if you are not sure what you heard, assume it is someone trying to kill you. This may sound paranoid, but in a land where Blackfoot war parties routinely travel at night, using the darkness and the cold as cover, paranoia is simply another name for common sense. March of the second winter brings a peculiar phenomenon that the mountain men call the false spring. A warm wind blows up from the south, a Chinook, the Indians call it, using a word from the Pacific Northwest tribes, and the temperature rises 40 or 50 degrees in a matter of hours. One morning, you wake to 20 below zero, and by afternoon, the thermometer, if you had one, would read 40 above. The snow begins to melt with startling speed, water pouring off the hillsides in 1,000 small streams, the frozen river creaking and groaning as the ice begins to soften. The sun is warm on your face, and you strip off your capote and work in your shirt sleeves, reveling in the unprecedented luxury of not being cold. Birds appear from nowhere, singing. The horses lift their heads and prick their ears as if they cannot quite believe what they are feeling. For a few delirious hours, it seems that winter is over. It is not. The Chinook is a tease, a cruel joke played by the atmosphere, and the mountain men who have been through it before know better than to trust it. Wait, says Caleb, watching the warm wind strip the snow from the lower slopes with an expression of deep suspicion. This will not last. The mountains are not done with us yet. He is right. By nightfall, the wind has shifted back to the northwest, the temperature has plummeted, and the partially melted snow has frozen solid into a sheet of ice that covers everything: the ground, the trees, the shelters, the horses, with a slick, treacherous glaze. This is worse than the powder snow that preceded it, because ice is nearly impossible to walk on, nearly impossible for the horses to stand on, and utterly impossible to dig through to reach the grass underneath. The horses slip and fall and cannot get up, their hooves sliding helplessly on the glazed surface, and you spend the next 2 days spreading sand and gravel from the riverbank over the icy ground around camp, trying to create enough traction for men and animals to move without breaking their legs. The falls. Spring is followed by a real cold snap, the last gasp of winter and perhaps the most dangerous. The temperature drops to 40 below and stays there for a week, day after day, night after night, a sustained, unrelenting assault of cold that pushes you to the very limits of endurance. The fire consumes wood at a prodigious rate, and the wood-gathering parties range farther and farther from camp, stripping the cottonwood groves bare, hauling logs on their shoulders through snow that has been frozen into, a crust hard enough to walk on, but too slippery to walk on safely. 2 men fall through the ice of the river while gathering driftwood. The ice, weakened by the Chinook, has refrozen with treacherous thin spots and are pulled out soaking wet and half dead, their clothing freezing to their bodies within seconds of exposure to the air. They are stripped, wrapped in buffalo robes, and placed beside the fire, where they shiver and shake for hours before their core temperature rises enough for them to speak. One of them loses the tips of 3 fingers. The other, younger and stronger, escapes with nothing worse than a deep, bone-level chill that lingers for days. During this cold snap, you discover something interesting about the human relationship with extreme cold. There is a point beyond which the cold ceases to be painful and becomes simply a state of being, a condition of existence that you accept with a dull, numb resignation that is not quite surrender, but is certainly not resistance. Your body has been cold for so long that it has forgotten what warmth feels like. The ache in your fingers, your toes, your face, your ears, the constant, gnawing discomfort that has been your companion for months fades into a kind of background noise. Like the hum of a machine that you eventually stop hearing, you move through your daily tasks, gathering wood, tending the fire, feeding the horses, checking the camp perimeter, with a mechanical efficiency that requires no thought, no decision, no emotional engagement. You have become a survival machine, performing the functions necessary to keep the organism alive and nothing more. The veterans recognize this state, and they watch for it in the younger men. Because it can be dangerous. When a man stops caring about the cold, he also stops caring about the things that keep him alive, maintaining his fire, drying his clothing, eating enough food, staying awake on guard duty. This is the stage at which mistakes happen, the stage at which a man falls asleep on watch and freezes to death, or walks into the river because he has forgotten to look where he is going, or simply sits down in the snow and decides not to get up. Keep moving, Fitzpatrick tells you, gripping your shoulder with his good hand and looking into your eyes with an intensity that cuts through the fog of cold-induced indifference. Keep moving, keep eating, keep thinking. The day you stop thinking is the day you die. You keep thinking, you keep moving, you keep surviving, 1 hour at a time, 1 meal at a time, 1 night at a time, and slowly, imperceptibly, degree by degree and minute by minute, winter loosens its grip. The days grow longer, the sun climbs higher. The cold retreats, not steadily, but in fits and starts, 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but the overall trend is unmistakable. Spring is coming. Spring is always coming if you can hold on long enough, and you can. You have proven that to yourself, twice now, and the knowledge is both a comfort and a burden, because you know with the absolute certainty of hard-won experience, that you will be back in these mountains next winter, and the winter after that, and the winter after that, because this is your life now. You are a mountain man. Let us step back from your personal journey for a moment and consider the broader picture, the vast, interconnected web of trade, politics, geography, and human ambition that brought you and hundreds of men like you into these mountains in the first place. The fur trade of the 1820s and 1830s is one of the most remarkable economic enterprises in American history, a business that stretches from the beaver ponds of the Rocky Mountains to the hat shops of London and Paris, connecting the most remote wilderness on the continent to the most sophisticated cities in the world through a chain of trappers, traders, merchants, and manufacturers. At the top of this chain are the fur companies, William Ashley's Rocky Mountain Fur Company, the American Fur Company controlled by John Jacob Astor, the Hudson's Bay Company operating from the north, competing fiercely for control of the beaver-rich streams of the Rockies. These companies employ hundreds of men, maintain supply lines that stretch thousands of miles, and generate profits that make their owners some of the wealthiest men in America. John Jacob Astor, who built much of his fortune on the fur trade, dies in 1848 as the richest man in the United States, with an estate worth approximately $20 million, equivalent to many billions in today's money. He never sets foot in the Rocky Mountains. He never feels the cold. He never eats horse meat or fights Blackfoot warriors or loses his fingers to frostbite. He simply collects the pelts and sells the hats. And the distance between his comfortable counting house in New York and the frozen streams where you risk your life for his profit is a distance measured, not just in miles, but in moral categories that the age prefers not to examine too closely. At the bottom of the chain are you and your fellow trappers, the bushway brigades employed by the companies, and the free trappers who work independently, selling their pelts to the highest bidder at rendezvous. The distinction between company, men and free trappers is important, both economically and psychologically. Company men are employees bound by contract to trap for a specific company, use company equipment, and sell their pelts at company prices. They receive a fixed wage, that $400 a year, and their supplies are provided by the company at the extortionate mountain prices. Free trappers, by contrast, work for themselves. They own their own equipment, set their own schedules, trap where they choose, and sell their pelts to whoever offers the best price. They make more money than company men when trapping is good, but they bear all the risk when trapping is bad, and they must purchase their own supplies at the same inflated prices. The free trappers are the aristocrats of the mountain man world. They answer to no one, go where they please, and conduct themselves with an independence and self-sufficiency that borders on the anarchic. The most famous free trappers, men like Kit Carson, Jim Bridger, Joe Meek, and Jedediah Smith, are legends in their own time. Their exploits celebrated around 100 campfires, their names spoken with a mixture of admiration and envy by the company men who lack their freedom. Kit Carson, who enters the mountains as a teenage runaway in 1826, becomes perhaps the most famous mountain man of all, a small, quiet, soft-spoken man with blue eyes and sandy hair who is as comfortable in a Cheyenne teepee as in a St. Louis drawing room, and who survives more close calls with death than seems mathematically possible. Carson's response to any inquiry about his numerous brushes with mortality is a modest shrug. The observation that a man does what he has to do. This is either profound humility or strategic understatement, and it is impossible to tell which. Jim Bridger, who enters the mountains at 18 as one of Ashley's enterprising young men and does not leave for more than 20 years, is the mountain man's mountain man, a trapper, scout, guide, and storyteller of prodigious ability who probably knows more about the geography of the Rocky Mountain West than any living person, white or Indian. Bridger discovers the Great Salt Lake, or at least is the first white man to see it, and tastes the water and declares it an arm of the Pacific Ocean, which is a reasonable conclusion for a man who has never seen the ocean. He explores the Yellowstone country and returns with tales of boiling springs, petrified forests, and mountains of glass that his listeners dismiss as outrageous lies. They are not lies. Bridger has seen things that will not be officially discovered for another 40 years, and his descriptions, though colored by the hyperbolic storytelling style of the mountain men, are remarkably accurate. Jedediah Smith is perhaps the most extraordinary of all the mountain men, and his story is, in many ways, the story of the fur. Trade itself, brilliant, ambitious, brutal, and ultimately tragic. Smith enters the mountains in 1822, at the age of 23, and within a few years he has become one of the most accomplished explorers in American history. He is the first white man to cross the Sierra Nevada, the first to travel overland from the American settlements to California, the first to traverse the Great Basin, a vast, waterless, lifeless expanse of salt flats and sagebrush that nearly kills him and his men before they stagger into the mission settlements of Southern California, half dead from thirst and exhaustion. Smith is different from most mountain men in several important respects. He does not drink. He does not gamble. He does not take an Indian wife. He carries a Bible with him everywhere he goes and reads it by firelight every evening, no matter how tired or cold or hungry he is. His men respect him enormously, not despite his piety, but because of it, because his faith gives him a steadiness and a moral center that is rare in the wild, lawless world of the fur trade. Smith also has the worst luck of any man in the mountains. In 1823, during an expedition along the Missouri River, he is attacked by a grizzly bear that seizes his head in its jaws, tearing his scalp from his skull and ripping off his left ear. Smith calmly instructs one of his men to sew the scalp and ear back on with a needle and thread, and within 10 days, he is back in the saddle. his head wrapped in a bandage, his jaw set, his blue eyes scanning the horizon for the next challenge. Smith dies in 1831, at the age of 32, killed by Comanche warriors on the Cimarron River in present-day Kansas. He is alone when they find him, riding ahead of his company to look for water, and the details of his death are uncertain. No white man witnesses it, and the account is pieced together later from Comanche sources and the trading post where Smith's pistols and rifle eventually turn up for sale. He dies as he lived, alone in the wilderness, far from any settlement, his Bible in his saddlebags and his rifle in his hands. Historians still argue whether Smith was a visionary or a fanatic, a hero or a fool, and the argument, like most arguments about the mountain men, generates more heat than light. The truth, as usual, is complicated. Smith was all of these things and none of them. He was a man who loved the wilderness with a passion that consumed his life, and the wilderness, in the end, consumed him in return. But these are the famous names, the ones that survive in the history books and the museum. Exhibits and the bronze statues in small western towns. For every Kit Carson and Jim Bridger and Jedediah Smith, there are 100 anonymous men whose names appear only on a company roster, if they appear at all. Men who trapped and hunted and fought and froze and died without leaving any record of their existence except a pile of beaver pelts and perhaps a small cairn of stones in some remote mountain valley. These are the men who interest me most because they are the ones whose experience most closely resembles yours. Ordinary men doing an extraordinary thing, surviving in conditions that seem, from the comfortable distance of 2 centuries, almost impossible. The question that hangs over all of this, the question that you ask yourself on cold nights in your buffalo robes, staring at the ceiling of your shelter and listening to the wind, is simple. Why? Why do you do this? Why do you endure the cold, the hunger, the danger, the loneliness, the privation, when you could be back east, warm and fed and safe, working in a shop or a mill or a farm, leading a life of ordinary comfort and predictable routine? The answer is different for every man, and most men, if pressed, could not articulate it clearly. Some are here for the money, though the money, as we have seen, is mostly illusory, a cruel joke played by the fur companies on men too busy surviving to do the math. Some are here because they are running from something, the law, a bad marriage, a debt, a scandal, and the mountains offer an anonymity that civilization cannot match. Some are here because they are addicted to the freedom, the wild, unstructured existence that the mountains provide, and the thought of returning to the rules and routines of settled life fills them with a horror more intense than anything the cold or the Blackfoot can inflict. And some, perhaps most, are here because they cannot explain why they are here, because the pull of the mountains is something deeper than reason, deeper than logic, deeper than self-interest. It is a hunger of the soul, longing for something that civilization cannot provide and that the wilderness satisfies, at least partially, at least temporarily. The mountains are beautiful and terrible and vast, and they make you feel alive in a way that nothing else can, and for some men, that feeling is worth any price. The years pass. You spend 3 winters in the mountains. No, 4, no, 5, and the distinction between individual years begins to blur. The specific events of each winter merging into a single composite experience of cold and endurance and slow, hard-won survival. You remember certain moments with crystalline clarity. The time you killed a bull elk at 300 yards in a snowstorm, the time you fell through river ice up to your armpits and had to run a mile back to camp before your clothes froze solid, the time you sat up all night on guard duty in 40 below cold and watched the northern lights dance across the sky in curtains of green and purple fire. But the daily routine, the wood gathering, the fire tending, the hunting, the cooking, the sleeping, blends together into a single endless winter that seems in memory to last forever. Your body shows the marks of those winters. Your hands are scarred and calloused, the skin cracked and roughened by years of immersion in icy water. You are missing the tip of your left little finger, lost to frostbite during your second winter when you made the mistake of removing your mitten to reload your rifle in a blizzard. Your face is weathered and lined far beyond your years, the skin darkened by sun and wind to the color of old leather. Your knees ache in the cold, and your back, strained by years of hauling heavy loads through deep snow, never quite stops hurting. You walk with a slight limp, the result of a fall on ice that wrenched your right ankle and never healed properly. You are, by any objective measure, an old man at 30, used up, worn out, a body that has been pushed to its limits and beyond, day after day, year after year, in conditions that were never designed for human habitation. But there is something else too, something that the scars and the aches and the missing finger do not show. There is a competence, a quiet mastery of your environment that you wear like a second skin. You can look at a stretch of country and know, within minutes, where the water is, where the game is, where the best shelter can be found, where the danger lies. You can read a set of tracks in the snow and reconstruct the last 24 hours of an animal's life, where it slept, where it ate, how fast it was moving, whether it was calm or frightened. You can start a fire in a blizzard, build a shelter in an hour, find your way through a trackless forest in the dark. You have become, without quite meaning to, one of the most skilled and adaptable human beings on the planet, capable of surviving in conditions that would kill 99 out of 100 civilized men within a week. The fur trade is changing around you, though you are slow to recognize it. The beaver populations, hammered by years of intensive trapping, are declining. Streams that once held hundreds of beaver are now trapped out, their dams crumbling, their ponds draining, the willows and aspens along the banks growing back unchecked. You have to travel farther and trap harder for fewer pelts, and the returns are diminishing with each passing year. At the same time, the market is shifting. In the fashion capitals of Europe, the beaver felt hat is going out of style, replaced by hats made of silk imported from China. The price of beaver pelts, which peaked in the early 1830s, is falling steadily, and the fur companies, sensing the change, are cutting back their operations, reducing the number of men they employ, and closing down their supply lines. The last rendezvous is held in 1840 on the Green River near the mouth of Horse Creek in the same country, where so many previous rendezvous have taken place. It is a sad, subdued affair compared to the raucous celebrations of earlier years. Only about 100 men attend, and the supply caravan is small. Few wagons of goods that sell poorly because the trappers have less money and fewer pelts to trade. The talk around the campfires is grim. The old days are over. The beaver are gone, the prices are falling, and the mountains, which once seemed to offer unlimited opportunity, are emptying out. Robert Newell, a veteran trapper, turns to his friend Joe Meek and says the words that have come to symbolize the end of the fur trade era. Come, we are done with this life in the mountains, done with wading in beaver dams and freezing or starving alternately, done with Indian trading and Indian fighting. The fur trade is dead in the Rocky Mountains, and it is no place for us now, if ever it was. Newell is right, and you know it. The mountains are changing, and the life you have built here is changing with them. But knowing something intellectually and accepting it emotionally are two very different things, and the process of letting go, of releasing your grip on this wild, beautiful, punishing existence that has defined you for the better part of a decade, is slower and more painful than any winter you have endured. You are a mountain man. It is not just what you do, it is what you are. Take away the mountains, the trapping, the buffalo hunts, the winter camps, the rendezvous. Take away all of that. And what is left? A weathered, scarred, semi-literate man in buckskin with no trade, no property, no connections, and a set of skills that are rapidly becoming obsolete. The world is moving on, and you are being left behind. Some men adapt. Kit Carson reinvents himself as an Army scout and guide, leading John C. Fremont's expeditions across the West and becoming a national celebrity in the process. Jim Bridger builds a trading post on the Oregon Trail and profits from the great westward migration that follows the fur trade era. Joe Meek walks to Oregon, enters politics, and eventually becomes the territory's first United States Marshal. A transformation so improbable that it sounds like fiction. These are the success stories, the mountain men who managed to translate their wilderness skills into something the changing world values. They are the exceptions. Most mountain men do not fare so well. Many drift into obscurity, working as hired hands on ranches, as scouts for the army at reduced wages, as guides for emigrant wagon trains heading west on trails that the mountain men themselves blazed. Some retreat deeper into the wilderness, becoming hermits and recluses, living alone in remote cabins, trapping for subsistence rather than profit, clinging to a way of life that has already passed into history. Some drink themselves to death, spending their last years in the saloons of frontier towns, telling their stories to anyone who will listen, trading their dignity for whiskey and dying alone in boarding houses and back alleys. The mortality rate among retired mountain men is shockingly high, not from the physical dangers they once faced, but from the spiritual emptiness of a life without purpose, without community, without the terrible and sustaining challenge of surviving another winter in the mountains. But that is the future, and we are not there yet. We are still in the mountains, still in the grip of winter, still engaged in the daily business of staying alive. Let us return to your shelter, your fire, your buffalo robes, and the long, cold night that stretches ahead of you like an unwritten page. It is your 5th winter in the Rockies, and you are camped in a valley along the Upper Green River, in country so remote that the nearest white settlement is more than 1,000 miles away. The year is 1833 or 1834, you have lost track, and it does not matter. Time in the mountains is measured not in years but in seasons, and the only season that matters right now is winter. You are alone tonight. Your trapping partner, a laconic Missourian named Henry, has gone downriver with a small party to trade with a band of Shoshone who are camped 10 miles south of here. He will be back in a few days, but tonight you are the sole occupant of your little half-faced camp. And the solitude, which you usually enjoy, feels tonight like a weight pressing down on your chest. The fire burns low, the shadows lengthen, and the silence of the winter night fills the shelter like water filling a vessel. You can hear the river, a faint gurgling beneath the ice. You can hear the wind, a soft, steady exhalation that moves through the cottonwood branches with a sound like distant breathing. You can hear your own heartbeat, slow and steady, the only proof you have that you are still alive. You think about home. You do this more often now than you did in your first or second winter, and the images that come to mind are sharper and more detailed than they used to be. Your mother's kitchen, with its wood stove and its flour-dusted table and its smell of baking bread. Your father's workshop, with its rows of tools hanging on pegs, and its curls of wood shavings on the floor. The girl you were sweet on before you left. What was her name? Sarah, with her brown hair and her shy smile and the way she looked at you when she thought you were not watching. You wonder what happened to her. You wonder if she married someone else, someone who stayed home and took over his father's farm and never went west, and never ate horse meat, and never woke up at 3 in the morning to the sound of wolves howling in a frozen valley 1,000 miles from the nearest church. You wonder if she ever thinks about you. And you decide, with a rueful shake of your head, that she probably does not. You have been gone too long. You are a memory now, if you are anything at all. The fire needs more wood. You force yourself out of your robes, pull on your moccasins, and step outside into the winter night. The cold hits you with its familiar force, squeezing the breath from your lungs, making your eyes water, turning the inside of your nose into a tingling, crystallized maze. The sky is clear tonight, brilliantly, devastatingly clear, and the stars blaze overhead with an intensity that seems almost hostile, as though each one is a tiny fire burning at an impossible distance, mocking your own small, struggling flame. The Milky Way arches across the sky like a river of light, and you stand there, breath smoking, staring up at it. And for a moment the cold and the loneliness and the aching muscles and the empty stomach all fall away, and there is nothing but you and the stars and the vast, indifferent beauty of the universe. You gather an armload of wood from the pile, cottonwood and juniper, the last of the nearby supply. Tomorrow you will have to range farther and carry it back to the shelter. The fire catches eagerly, sending up a shower of sparks that spiral into the darkness like tiny orange stars. Momentarily rivaling the real ones before winking out, you feed the fire slowly, piece by piece, building it back up to a steady blaze that pushes the darkness back to the edges of the clearing and fills the shelter with welcome heat. Then you settle back into your robes, pulling them up to your chin, and watch the flames dance and flicker and cast moving shadows on the buffalo hide walls. You think about the men you have known in the mountains. Some are dead. Antoine Clement, who nearly froze to death on the Yellowstone, finally did freeze to death on the Powder River 2 years later, caught in a blizzard without shelter. Jacques Laramie, the laughing French-Canadian who taught you to trap beaver, was killed by Arapaho warriors near the river that now bears his name. The Laramie River, in present-day Wyoming, a permanent memorial to a man whose grave has never been found. Old Caleb, the storyteller, simply disappeared one spring, walked into the mountains alone, and never came back. Some say the Blackfoot got him, others say he found whatever he was looking for and decided not to return. You prefer the second explanation, though you suspect the first is more likely. Others are still alive, still trapping, still enduring the winters with the same stubborn, inexhaustible resilience that defines the mountain man character. Ezra, the grizzled Kentuckian, is camped somewhere on the Yellowstone, probably complaining about the cold and eating horse meat and telling bad jokes to anyone within earshot. Joseph, the quiet Pennsylvanian with the beaded moccasins, married his Shoshone girl and is living with her band near the headwaters of the Salmon River, happier than you have ever seen him. His transformation from lonely bachelor to contented husband so complete that his old companions barely recognize him. Fitzpatrick is still leading brigades, still making plans, still keeping his men alive through winters that would defeat a lesser leader, his calm voice and steady hand. Holding everything together when the cold and the hunger and the fear threaten to pull it apart. You realize, lying in your robes with the fire crackling and the stars wheeling overhead, that these men are your family, not by blood, but by something deeper, by shared experience, by mutual dependence, by the bonds forged in the crucible of extreme conditions. You have suffered together, starved together, fought together, laughed together, and survived together, and these experiences have created connections that are stronger and more durable than most family ties. A man who has shared a buffalo robe with you on a 40-below night, whose body heat kept you alive while your own heat kept him alive, is a man you will never forget, a man whose name will be on your lips when you are old and gray, and the mountains are nothing but a distant memory. This is the paradox of the mountain man's life. It is lonely and communal at the same time, isolating and intimate in equal measure. You spend weeks, sometimes months, alone in the wilderness, with no human companionship except the occasional encounter with an Indian band or a passing trapper, and yet the bonds you form with the men you winter with, hunt with, fight beside, are among the strongest human connections you will ever experience. The frontier strips away the social niceties, the polite fictions, the carefully maintained distances that characterize relationships in civilized society, and what remains is raw, unmediated human connection, the connection of men who depend on each other for their survival and know it, who have seen each other at their worst and their best, who have no secrets from each other, because secrets are a luxury that the mountains do not permit. The fire burns lower. You add another piece of wood, the last one within easy reach, and settle deeper into your robes. Your eyelids are heavy, your body warm and relaxed, the tension of the day slowly dissolving into the soft, dark tide of approaching sleep. The wind has died down, and the silence is complete. No wolves tonight, no creaking trees, no distant sounds of any kind. Just the fire, the stars, and the slow, rhythmic pulse of your own breathing. You dream. In the dream, you are walking through a forest of enormous trees. Cottonwoods, but much larger than any you have ever seen, their trunks as wide as houses, their branches spreading across the sky like the arms of some ancient, benevolent giant. The ground beneath your moccasins is soft and warm. Warm. And the air is filled with the scent of flowers and the sound of running water. There is no snow, there is no cold. The sun filters through the canopy in shafts of golden light that illuminate the forest floor in patches of brilliant green. You walk easily, without effort, your body light and painless, the aches and stiffness of your waking life dissolved into a fluid, effortless grace that feels like flying. In the dream, you come to a clearing, and in the clearing there is a fire, and around the fire sit all the men you have known in the mountains, the living and the dead, the veterans and the greenhorns, the heroes and the forgotten. Antoine is there, whole and healthy, his fingers intact, his eyes bright with the sardonic humor that characterized him before the cold took him. Jacques is there, laughing as always, his magnificent mustache freshly waxed, gesturing expansively as he tells some elaborate, probably fabricated story. Old Caleb is there, quiet and watchful, a faint smile on his weathered face. They are all there, Every man you have trapped with, fought beside, shared a meal with, argued with, mourned for, and they are warm and fed and safe, gathered around a fire that needs no tending, in a clearing where winter never comes. You wake slowly, reluctantly, pulled back to consciousness by the cold on your face, the only part of your body exposed to the air. The fire has burned down to embers, glowing faintly in the darkness, and the chill has crept back into the shelter like an unwelcome guest. You lie still for a moment, holding on to the fragments of the dream, savoring the warmth and the light and the faces of your friends before they dissolve into the reality of another winter morning. The sky, visible through the opening of your shelter, is just beginning to lighten, a faint gray-blue luminescence along the eastern horizon that promises dawn but not yet warmth. You build up the fire. You pull on your moccasins. You step outside and relieve yourself in the snow, the steam rising from the yellow patch like a small, undignified offering to the morning. You fill your tin cup with snow and set it by the fire to melt. You eat a strip of dried elk meat, chewing mechanically, your jaw working with the automatic precision of a machine processing raw material. The meat is tough and flavorless. It might as well be a piece of old shoe, but your body receives it gratefully, the calories flowing into your bloodstream like reinforcements arriving at a besieged fort. The morning is cold but calm, the air still and heavy with the crystalline clarity that only extreme cold produces. Every detail of the landscape is sharp and distinct. Each individual needle on the pine trees, each ripple in the ice on the river, each grain of snow on the surface of the drifts. The mountains surrounding the valley stand in perfect, frozen silence, their peaks catching the first light of the sun, turning from gray to pink to gold as the minutes pass. It is, you realize with a small shock of recognition, beautiful, achingly, heartbreakingly, impossibly beautiful. After all the hardship, all the suffering, all the cold and hunger and fear, the mountains are still beautiful, and you are still here to see them, and that, in the end, is enough. You remember something Seas Far Away said in the Crow Teepee, that long-ago winter night when you listened to the old man's stories while the wind howled outside. Winter is not punishment. It is the earth's way of breathing in. You did not understand it then, but you are beginning to understand it now. The cold, the hardship, the deprivation, these are not tests imposed on you by a hostile universe. They are the natural conditions of a world that is vastly larger and older and more powerful than any single human life. A world that operates according to its own rhythms and its own logic, indifferent to your comfort, but not to your existence. You are a part of this world, not separate from it, and the winters you endure are the price of admission to a beauty and a grandeur that cannot be experienced any other way. This is not a thought you can express to your companions. Mountain men do not talk about beauty and grandeur and the spiritual significance of winter. They talk about meat and pelts and rifles and the best way to avoid Blackfoot war parties, but the thought is there, lodged in some deep part of your mind, and it sustains you through the cold mornings and the dark nights and the long, hungry stretches between kills, like a small fire burning in a sheltered place, impossible to extinguish. Henry returns from the Shoshone camp 3 days later, riding into the valley with a string of pack horses loaded with dried buffalo meat, pemmican, and a large quantity of dried roots, and berries that the Shoshone women have prepared. He also brings news. The Shoshone say that the weather will break early this year. Their elders have observed certain signs, the behavior of the birds, the texture of the snow, the particular quality of the light at sunset, that indicate an early spring. Henry relays this information with the cautious optimism of a man who has learned not to trust good news too readily, but you can see in his eyes that he wants to believe it, and so do you. The Shoshone are right. By early March, the valley is thawing. The process begins at the margins. A drip here, a trickle there, a small dark patch of bare earth appearing on a south-facing slope, and then accelerates into a full-scale transformation that seems to happen overnight. One morning you wake to the sound of water, not the muffled gurgle of the river beneath ice, but the bright, cheerful splash of water running openly over stones, cascading down the hillsides in 100 small streams, filling the air with a sound so sweet and so welcome that you stand outside your shelter with your eyes closed and your face lifted to the sun and simply listen. The ice on the river cracks. and breaks with a series of explosive reports that echo off the valley walls like gunfire, and the freed water surges downstream, carrying chunks of ice and debris in a muddy, jubilant torrent. The birds return in waves, first the hardy species, the magpies and the jays, then the meadowlarks and the blackbirds, then the warblers and the tanagers, each wave a little more colorful and a little more vocal than the last, until the valley is filled with birdsong from dawn to dusk. The elk drift back up from the lowlands, their winter coats beginning to shed in ragged patches, their ribs still showing but their eyes bright and alert. The beaver emerge from their lodges and begin their annual frenzy of dam building and territory marking, and you can hear the sharp slap of their tails on the water echoing through the canyon like applause. You unpack your traps, those 6 heavy steel instruments that are the tools of your trade and the reason you are here, and begin the spring trapping season. The water is agonizingly cold, still laced with snowmelt, and each morning when you wade in to check your trap line, your breath catches, and your muscles clench, and your feet go numb within seconds. But the beaver are active and numerous, their pelts thick and glossy from the winter. And each morning you pull 2 or 3 or 4 from your traps, and the pile of stretched pelts in your camp grows with satisfying speed. The spring trapping season is your favorite time in the mountains. Hard work, cold water, tired muscles, but also warmth and light and new growth and the intoxicating sense of the world coming back to life after the long hibernation of winter. You are a different person than the greenhorn who signed his name on a company roster in St. Louis all those years ago. That boy, and he was a boy despite his 22 years, knew nothing about the mountains, nothing about the cold, nothing about himself. He came west looking for adventure and money, and he found both, along with things he never expected: knowledge, skill, endurance, humility, and a deep, complicated love for a landscape that tried to kill him every winter and rewarded him every spring with a beauty that made the suffering worthwhile. The spring sun climbs higher each day, and the warmth it brings is not the treacherous warmth of a Chinook, but the genuine, sustained warmth of the changing season. The snow retreats up the mountainsides, leaving the valley floor green and muddy and alive with the small dramas of renewal: insects hatching, flowers blooming, animals emerging from burrows and dens, blinking in the unaccustomed light. You sit outside your shelter in the evening, watching the sun set behind the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and purple that no artist could capture. And you feel something that you have not felt in months, something that the cold and the dark and the hunger had buried so deeply that you had forgotten it existed. You feel happy. Not the manic, whiskey-fueled happiness of the rendezvous, but a quieter, deeper happiness. The happiness of a man who has endured something difficult and emerged, scarred but intact, on the other side. The happiness of survival. The happiness of spring. The valley fills with light. The green river, swollen with snowmelt, runs fast and clear over a bed of polished stones, and the cottonwood trees along its banks are fully leafed now, their branches swaying in a warm breeze that carries the scent of sage and wildflowers and the faint, marshy smell of the beaver ponds upstream. You lean against a sun-warmed rock and close your eyes, and the warmth soaks into your skin, your muscles, your bones, reaching places that the cold inhabited for so long that you had begun to think of them as permanently frozen. The rock is solid and warm against your back, and the sun is on your face, and the river is singing its ancient, unhurried song, and somewhere in the cottonwoods a meadowlark is pouring out a melody so pure and so effortless that it sounds less like a bird singing and more like the earth itself expressing joy. You have survived another winter. 5 winters now, each one a trial, each one a teacher, each one leaving its marks on your body and your mind. You carry those winters with you, the way a tree carries its rings, invisibly, internally, each one adding a layer of strength and knowledge and resilience that cannot be removed. The cold is in your bones, not as a physical sensation, but as a memory so vivid and so deeply embedded that you will feel it for the rest of your life, in warm rooms and on summer days, and in places where winter is nothing more than a mild inconvenience. You will feel it, and you will remember, and the memory will connect you to these mountains and these men and this vast, wild, beautiful, terrible landscape that shaped you into something you never expected to become. The spring trapping continues for another few weeks, and then it is time to pack up and head for the rendezvous. You break camp with a practiced efficiency that requires no thought, rolling your robes, stacking your pelts, loading the pack mules, scattering the fire pit, leaving no trace of your winter occupation except a patch of trampled ground and a few charred logs that will be overgrown by summer. You mount your horse, take one last look at the valley, the river, the trees, the mountains rising white and massive against the blue sky, and turn south toward the rendezvous site. The ride is pleasant, unhurried, and sweet with the sights and smells and sounds of a world reborn. You cross meadows where herds of antelope graze, their white rumps flashing like semaphore signals as they bound away at your approach. You ford streams where cutthroat trout hold steady in the current, their spotted sides gleaming like coins beneath the clear water. You ride through forests of lodgepole, pines so dense that the sunlight filters through in narrow golden shafts, illuminating floating motes of pollen and the tiny iridescent bodies of mayflies hatching in the warm air. The world is generous again, abundant and forgiving, and the memory of winter, the cold, the hunger, the fear, recedes with each mile, dimming like a fire seen from a great distance, still visible but no longer threatening. You think about the winters to come. There will be more. How many, you cannot say, but there will be more, because this is your life, and you cannot imagine any other. You will endure them as you have endured the ones before, with skill and patience and stubbornness and the help of your companions and the knowledge passed down from the native peoples and the sheer unreasonable refusal to surrender that is the mountain man's greatest and most essential quality. You will be cold again, hungry again, frightened again, lonely again, and you will survive because that is what you do. That is what mountain men do. They survive. The sun moves lower, painting the sky in the soft, warm colors of late afternoon, amber and rose and pale gold. Your horse walks steadily, his hooves making a rhythmic, soothing pattern on the trail, and you sway gently with his movement, your body relaxed, your mind drifting. The warmth of the sun, the gentle motion of the horse, the murmur of the breeze through the pines, these sensations weave together into something larger and softer and more enveloping than any individual feeling, something that wraps around you like a warm robe and holds you gently, carrying you forward into the long golden evening. The mountains stand around you, patient and eternal, their peaks still capped with the last remnants of winter snow that will melt in the coming weeks and feed the rivers that feed the beaver ponds that brought you here in the first place. The circle continues. Winter gives way to spring, spring to summer, summer to fall, and fall inevitably to winter again. But right now, in this moment, the sun is warm and the sky is clear, and the world is green and alive and full of possibility, and you are here to see it. And that is everything. Your eyes grow heavy. The horse knows the way, and you let the reins go slack, trusting him to follow the trail while your mind drifts into that soft, warm space between waking and sleeping, where the past and the present and the future blend together into a single, luminous whole. The river murmurs, the wind whispers, the meadowlark sings its last long, liquid note, and the sound hangs in the air like a benediction, like a promise, like a prayer. The light fades to a soft, deep gold. The shadows lengthen, the mountains darken against the sky, and somewhere, in a valley you cannot see from here, beaver slaps its tail on the water, one sharp, clear sound that echoes through the canyon and then fades into silence. Sleep well. The mountains will be here in the morning. End of script. Sweet dreams.